if you start to develop a relationship with the soul, everything else just starts to unfold.
Yeah. And you know, in English, we don't have the right words because relationship with the soul is not actually correct, because it's like recognizing that what I am is that.
Oh,
right. It's a tricky thing, because we could say like talking to our soul, but then it's like, who's doing the talking, right? You know what I mean? But the one who taught me about that first was Paul Chek. It starts by just closing your eyes and tuning in with yourself and asking yourself, dear soul, please show me what a yes looks like and feels like. For me, I noticed this rising of energy that surges up through my body and kind of comes up into like my face and my nose. Everybody has their own unique signature.
Mine starts kind of in my gut, comes up through the heart, through the chest, and then I feel this like pulsing in my ears. Mine better than yours?
There's no such thing. Then say, dear soul, show me what my no looks like. Notice what you feel and what happens.
I feel this like tension in my chest from like shoulder to shoulder. It's just like.
So now that you know how to do it, and how to talk to that part of yourself and identifying with that as you start small. You say, dear soul, would you like chicken or beef? You don't start off with, should I leave this relationship? Yeah. You start with these little small things that don't mean much, and you start practicing with that.
I love this.
So you start practicing these kinds of things, and it takes a while to really learn that signature, because what's really interesting about it is that the ego can do a very good job at impersonating the soul, because the ego will do whatever it can to protect itself. The ego is your primary identity. Your soul's never going to tell you to do something that is against your overall well-being. It's really centering yourself, taking time to clear yourself and wait till you feel centered. If you can imagine stepping into a pond and then seeing all of the ripples go, and then imagining waiting till all of those ripples go away and the pond is completely still again. And then asking the question, and let the question bubble up from that place without a level of detachment to the outcome. And then when you're coming from that place, you're living with your full potential. Water in general is like, there's so much more to know. I mean, at my house, in the style of Paul Chek, I have an enormous crystal water charger that's basically alternating rocks of yin and yang in like a kind of like a dome function with lots of crystals. And so I take these 5-gallon jugs of Mountain Valley water. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I take these 5-gallon jugs of Mountain Valley water in glass and place them inside the crystal charger for at least a 24-hour period. And then what's essentially happening is, water that we're normally drinking, first of all, if it comes through like the pipes, it's hitting all of the 90-degree angles, which water never wants to touch. Water always moves in like a circular,
like a vortex
function. Yeah, like a vortex, or I forget the word, but it's circulating, right? If you go out in nature, you see water circulating around rocks. But we have them sitting in these bottles, in these plastic bottles that are like pooling and crunching, let alone all the estrogens coming from the plastic, which is like totally screwing everybody, particularly young men with now extremely high estrogen levels. But back to the charging, this whole idea is that water is the largest carrier of energy and information. And normally in nature, where we were drinking water that was coming down like a stream, let's say, exposed to the sun, exposed to the seasons, exposed to all of the different elements, right?
Like the minerals.
And they're also getting like homeopathic doses of the energy and information of things in nature that are like bacteria and fungus.
Can you explain just homeopathic, just for...
What homeopathic is basically, removing the particle that's inside of, like, say, a solution. So, you put, like, let's say the flu virus in a solution, and then you keep diluting it until you can't actually find any of the particle of what you originally put in there. But what's remaining is the energy of it. And so the water sort of carrying these sort of energetic signatures of the various things in nature. So when you're drinking the water, it's informing your immune system of what you might come across, right? And so, the full moon or the new moon or, the bugs that fly around it, all of this information, all of this life force is then infused into the water, which then comes into our body. And just like eating processed food, if you eat processed food, your body has to actually use more energy than it's receiving from the food to convert it into human cells.
Would you equate this idea of water into like for the trees and plants for the mycelium network? Is it similar the way that it uses information?
In what way?
Well, I'm hearing like it's like a carrier of information. And I feel like the mycelium network, which is under, within the earth around us, that it is allowing communication from one tree to another to say, hey, look, this is
right. This is what's going on.
This potential, predator or whatever the proper term is coming into our ecosystem. You need this to protect yourself. And it kind of sends it out in that way. So I feel like the water coming down, the bugs, the insects, the different things that are in the environment.
Totally. Yeah. And we've closed ourselves off to that, right? We don't realize that as human beings, we are open energy systems. We are totally in contact with everything. Everything in this room right now is having an effect on us energetically, right? How we're sitting right now and what that relationship is to everything around us in the room is putting us in a particular type of energy. And so, Native Americans and even in my work and process work, there's this idea of earth spots. Like there's a particular spot on the earth that resonates with you. So, when I go out and, this is what we do in biogeometry. So if I'm going outside and I'm doing Tai Chi, I can take my pendulum, stand in a particular spot and rotate myself, like let's say clockwise while I'm measuring to find what's the right position for me at this time of the day in relationship to my environment that's going to give me the most amount of energy. Right?
Really?
So all of these things are always talking to us and interacting with us all the time. And so water, just to get back to that thought, like when we have processed food, which we don't, but if we did, and I highly recommend against that, but your body has to use more energy to turn that into something that your body recognizes as food. It's actually depleting you. And so the same thing happens with water. So if you're drinking like, Dasani or some kind of crap bottled tap water, your body, it's which is extremely acidic, by the way, your body doesn't even has to work to convert that and to structure it into what it normally knows as water, let alone the fact that it's informationless. So, if you're drinking tap water, let's say in New York City, where I lived for many years, even if you're filtering your water, think about all of the homeopathic doses of all of the toxins, all of the medications people are taking, all of the antibiotics that they're pissing out, and then it's going back into the water stream, and then it's being filtered. But they forget that even though they can't find the particle there, the energetic signature. And that's why, antibiotics and things like that don't work for anybody anymore for the most part. Antibiotics are like, at some point, they say that they're not even going to be effective because of the overuse of them. But, in my opinion, we're all sort of exposed to these things unless we take, what's going into our body very seriously. So the water that is coming out of the tap is hitting these 90-degree angles, going through these rusty pipes, then maybe being filtered, which also destructures it.
Mm-hmm.
But, maybe a necessity depending on where you're living and what's in your water. And then this whole idea of actually revitalizing the water and using the water as a tool to receive energy and information, right? So I know that when I'm drinking full moon water, it tastes a lot different than new moon water. I can taste the difference in my water from the summer to the winter, through the stages of the moon, etc. And so there's just so much more information to take in than we normally give credit to.
Oh, I love that. And
in fact, it makes the water taste a lot better as well.
Well, did you see the little doohickey I have on
Yeah.
the thing? So
Yeah.
that restructures the water, it
Yeah.
vortexes it, and as you said, it just kind of puts this certain signature in it that it would, ideally find in nature.
Totally. And, it also brings in the sense of ritual. And that's so important, right? It's these little things. It's even like when you make your coffee, right? Instead of doing an instant coffee, having the pour over that you have, or having a beautiful espresso machine and picking the right beans and, tapping in the grinder and making sure the machine's clean and using structured water and then having this like moment where you enjoy this, right? And it's like, that's just making coffee. But if once we start doing those levels of mindfulness and we start stacking them throughout our day, from what are we thinking about when we're getting up? How are we interacting with our water? For our tarot card pull, for our espresso, for being with our children, our work, etc. Those things are for me, they're really important, and they bring so much more richness to life. It's like water. People, have you ever heard someone say, "Oh, water's just water"?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, well,
I'm sure I've said it a number of times.
It's not.
Not recently.
It's not just water. Water is not just water. Coffee is not just coffee. Food is not just food. There's a whole continuum of possibilities.
Yeah, and I love the example of coffee, because I've gone, in and out of my relationship with coffee, and when I wasn't drinking coffee, I really looked forward to the morning when, my wife was still drinking it. So I got to make her the coffee, I get to go through the ritual. It didn't feel like I was missing out on the coffee. And I started to realize that actually that the little boost that I used to get from coffee and the caffeine, I wasn't getting anymore. So it almost was able to bypass maybe some of the negative effects.
Totally. What if the boost you're getting is from the process itself? Right? I mean, what if what we're really looking for is not the substance, but the process and the ceremony in doing it, right? Because you can switch from coffee and you can go to say like herbal tea, and there's something about it that still feels pretty good, because it's just like this process of taking a moment, having something warm and sipping it. In Zen monasteries, right? There's these legends of that a monk will train for 10 years, and then they'll go out into the world for 10 years. And when they come back, the head monk will sit with the person and just watch them drink tea. And how they drink the tea will say everything about their preparation for, what they've achieved, right? So there's something so primal and important about rituals.
Yeah, well, I'm interested to know more about your kind of morning ritual. And, the one thing that you said that really stood out for me as I've really started to build this morning ritual, I still like the thoughts that I have when I wake up, they're trending away from my to-do list,
right?
Which is great.
Right.
But there's still, I noticed it this morning, like there was the part of me, I just wanted to lay in bed with Peyton and just be there.
Isn't that nice?
And it was really nice, except there was just a little bit of a thing that was pulling me out of that. And I kept like resisting it.
Well, so the important thing to do, and we can get back to your question, but just an interesting thing is role play with that voice.
Okay.
So say, take both sides. Oh, I just really want to stay in bed today. I just want to lie with my wife and just cuddle and just be a little bit lazy. Well, you're going to miss out on, you have to do X, Y, Z. You have to be really productive. You got to go out there, you have this podcast today. You got to get your workout in, and you got to do all these different things. But I just want to let go and just lie in bed. And you start having these conversations and taking the different sides.
Yeah.
And you can start to work it out.
Well, I can already, I can see that playing out, and just seeing how silly that, not silly, but I can see the energy that's wanting to pull me into getting some work done. I see I see through that in a way that I wasn't able to before. And it's funny, it's somebody that I've been working with, a coach. We've actually named that archetype as Brutus. It's like the go-getter, like you got to get shit done.
Right.
Got to show up, perform.
So just talk to Brutus in the morning.
Yeah.
Brutus, I really appreciate you. You're really helpful to get things done, but right now I just need a little bit of rest.
Yeah, perfect. Yes. So you didn't always have rituals that are maybe this rich.
No.
You're
no.
One of so for those of you listening, today's guest, if you didn't look at the title when you clicked play, is Jason Pickard. Jason and I met through his brother Jared, who's also been on the podcast. And one of the things I'm most excited about today is, and I've shared this with a lot of my friends, is that you, more than anyone I've had on the podcast, and maybe anyone that I've ever met, have walked a similar path to me.
I've really felt that too. When we talked on FaceTime,
yeah,
a few weeks ago, I was like, there was like a light bulb that went off, because I was like, this is the only person I've met who really understands me, because he's walked in my shoes in his own life.
Yeah,
it was really interesting.
Yes, I'm excited to really dig into that stuff, and just, to give my listeners a little more context for, who I've been in these 50 years and the different iterations, and again, your story, I think it really lends itself to anyone listening, that we get those nudges and like, what can be on the other side of that maybe limiting belief that, I can only be a trader. I had that thought for a long time. Like, I don't have any transferable skills. I'm just a trader. Like, what am I going to do when this is over?
Right.
And so just like exploring that, letting people know that like, that's shit we all deal with. And there's kind of a way to sit with it, and there's a way through it, through your experience, through my experience, that maybe shed some light into that for others.
Totally. The things that you were saying before about this Brutus and all of that, it's like we have this primary process. This is like what we identify with in ourselves. My name's Jason. I'm heterosexual. I'm white. I'm this. I'm that. I'm a trader. And these are the things that are really known to us, who we think we are, what society tells us to do, what our parents have taught us, what our religion has taught us. It's these things of like, a real man has to do ...
Ooh, that's such Brutus energy.
In our family, we never do this. In our family, we always do that, right? This is identity. This is this primary process that we kind of get narrowed into at some point in our childhood, from this kind of open, expansive place into this narrow vision of who we are. And then there's this secondary process. This is like the part that we're evolving into, this part that is really more of our complete self, but it's unknown to us, right? So, for me as a trader, this secondary process was like more of this like creative side. It's the person that wants to just lay in bed a little bit more, right? So my primary process is more like the Brutus. It's like, got to get a lot done, got to accomplish a lot. And it's, for me, what's secondary is this idea of like way woo way, action without action, like just being instead of trying to do all the time, and playing with, unbound play with no outcome or reason why you're doing what you're doing.
Go back to the way woo way, because that's for me personally, it came up. Chase is here in the room as well. Chase was with me when I went to Landalozi in South Africa in January, and I had some sort of undiagnosed pathogen or whatever going on, and I was pretty much inactive, which is not my normal kind of way of being.
Yeah. So what happens is we call in these events.
Yeah.
So your secondary process of let's just say lying in bed and being a little bit more relaxed and doing less, if you marginalize that by not listening to that voice, it'll start to show up first in your dreams. And then it'll start to show up in little maybe flirts and little synchronicities. And then it'll show up in body symptoms. Then it'll show up in sickness, illness, disease, and then ultimately death, right? If you keep marginalizing these other parts of yourself. And so, when you get,
I like this.
If you're not listening to the little voice that says lie in bed, and you marginalize that, eventually you'll be on the road and you'll pick up some bacteria that will knock you down in bed and won't give you the choice.
Yeah.
Right. And I've experienced that many times. And so it's important to listen to these inner voices and to pay attention to what our fantasies are, what our flirts are. The whole world is always dreaming us up towards our wholeness. And we just have to pay attention to all these purposeful things that are happening all around us. And when we marginalize that, our body starts to give us symptoms, and we think of it as a disturbance, but it's really an ally. It's really an ally because it's getting you to reflect and to look at the idea that there's more to who you are than what you're identifying with in that moment.
And would this be, obviously the one component of this would be the pain teacher,
Sure.
right? Obviously Paul checks, or maybe not obvious to everyone listening, but.
And in that context, the pain teacher is an ally, because the pain teacher is coming when you usually do what Paul calls a suboptimal choice, a choice that leads to instant gratification, but kind of long-term pain, and is not in alignment with your long-term dream of who you are and where you want to go. And it brings along the pain teacher, which is an ally because it's helping you back to your compass or your North Star.
That's so good. And that motherfucker came by a couple weeks ago, probably 3 weeks ago now. And he showed up in my lower back, and it just locked up, spasmed almost for like a week. And what really came out of that was the most incredible gift. I mean, really, it finally forced me. I had this idea that I was exhausted, I needed a rest. It forced me into rest, and it forced me to confront that Brutus was still running the ship. And in listening to that and creating space for me to rest and recover and build my chi, build my energy, I created space for my relationship with my wife. And, as you know, I've been married 22 years, and I just don't know that we've ever seen each other like we do now. I mean, yeah, we were in love in the beginning and all that, but over time, you get into some patterning. And I felt like that broke both of us out of that pattern. And, it's been 3 weeks of just, the love I have for her, I didn't know if I could ever feel that way.
Yeah.
Because I was trying, which is part of the problem. As I was looking for solutions, when back to the, and I'm sure we'll get into the we all, I wasn't taking care of I.
Yeah.
And once I did that, everything opened up.
Well, you can only bring to a relationship what you've cultivated in yourself. Paul talks a lot about this, but if you have a 10% deficit in yourself, the relationship has a 20% deficit. When you're bringing your 50% in, right? Because that person that you're in relationship with can only has basically access to 10% less of you, and you're bringing 10% less of yourself to the relationship. The word relationship says elation, ship. How do we make our relationships a ship or a vehicle to be re-elated every time we see our partner, right? Sometimes we see our friends and we're happier than when we see our partners, right?
Yeah.
Or because they're these people that are really close to us. But to see your partner every moment, thank you for being here. Wow. I mean, it's just so incredible to be with such a beautiful person. It's sharing your life with me, and to be elated, like seeing a long lost friend again for the first time, each time. And of course, life makes that challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And relationships, certainly, in my opinion, have been the greatest spiritual path that I've had.
Oh, yeah. And as well, I'm sure, you've probably experienced with your own kids, just what that, for me has brought up, and really just trying to show up for them in a way that they need me to, not how I think I'm supposed to. And
that's the most important point, because one of the biggest problems with education right now, okay, the word education originally came from a Sanskrit word, and we could talk more about Sanskrit because it's so cool, called adhikari, which is an amazing word. And it basically means assessing one's ability for what they're ready for in education in that moment, based on their life experience and all of their previous life's experience up to that point. Adhikari went to edukare in Greek, and edukare means drawing from inside out, drawing something from inside somebody. And then we go to education, which means dumping a lot of useless information.
Yeah, memorizing some shit.
Right. So the key point, though, of what you said about giving them what they need. In ancient Vedic times, you would know the Jyotish, or the astrological importance of your child's birth. They came in with this sun, this moon, this physical body, these attributes. Based on that, they would be, on a broad sense, split up into what is now called the caste system, but that's a very colonized word that they never had in India until the Portuguese brought it in, but originally called varnas. And varnas are the four different types. So you have the warrior type, the protecting. So if you work for the FBI, if you're a police officer, if you're a bouncer, anything where you're protecting, you're a warrior. The Brahmin type, the professor type, which is the head. Okay, so if you're teaching, if you're a mentor, if you're a coach, if you're a wisdom teacher, etc., you're the professor. If you're the warrior, you're the arms, protecting. There's the producer, which is if you're a banker, like when we're on Wall Street, we're a producer. If you're a farmer, you're a producer. That's the stomach. And the legs are the provider, which is what most people are, providers of services like chiropractor, massage, nail salon, etc., right? And so you're first looking at your child from the perspective of what are they most inclined to be good at based on this choice that they took as a soul, or in Sanskrit, Atma, to come down and choose you as parents at this very scientific, specific time in history where the sun and the moon and the planets were in a very particular, unique organization, and that was done purposefully and mindfully so that they are now inclined to be in a certain different type of work.
Go a little deeper into that, because I'm with you on that.
Right.
I just don't know if a lot of people listening are familiar with the concept of us choosing our parents and our time and place and our basically the experience we're meant to have on earth.
Yeah.
As we're eternal beings.
Well, one of the things that, has helped me in that is studying the Vedas and the Vedic scriptures. And in the Vedas, they explain that as we are an Atma, not the Atma, we are an Atma, according to, which is translated as soul, but the word soul means sun, and the sun eventually burns out. And what we are never burns out. We have never been born, and we are never dying. We are an immortal, indivisible individual. And according to the Vedas, we choose based on, we have choice, but we also have karma based on what we've done in past lives. And all of that lines up for us to be born at a particular time. And the way it works is these planets and the way that they're organized around our birth and then throughout our life, literally they say graha, which means to grab. They literally are grabbing us and delivering little bits of karma and little sort of situations that put us in different positions for us to grow and evolve based on all of our previous life's actions and based on what's going on now and the position of the planets in the moment. And they also say that we can choose when we leave. We can choose when we leave. And there's particular times of the year where, in particular times of the moon cycle, where a very experienced yogi could decide, this is the time I'm going to leave my body, and literally count down like 10, 9, 8, 7, 1, blast off and go. And this, these are very highly evolved people, but there's records of people choosing when they leave. And it's also known in that culture that we choose when we come. And so back to the children, it's recognizing, what is their astrological makeup, and then watching them, seeing what are they good at, what do they like to do? What do they love to do? What brings them joy? And then based on their adhikari, or their level of experience, we then cultivate education geared towards them and all of those concepts. And this is how we can create, you see, all of these parts of the body, right? The head, the arms, etc., the stomach, the legs. What part would you want to cut off, right? And so we need all of these positions. Not one of them is better than the other. We are all one cell of the larger human body, and providing a place in society. Arnie Mindell, my teacher of process work, calls this deep democracy, In the Vedas, it would be called the social body. But this idea that like providing education geared towards everyone's particular inclinations to be a part of this larger social body, and then providing work and function and purpose for them within this, and we're all working together. I mean, that's real education, and the other stuff about education is, this is a little bit of my story, but I got to a point where I went to the University of Virginia, which is a great university. I graduated from the business school. I went on. I was, extremely, extremely successful trader at a very young age. By 26 years old, I was making multi-millions of dollars. I was now on the starting line for
top 30 under 30.
Top 30, yeah, top 30 under 30. And I was working for Paul Tudor Jones, which is my childhood mentor and, idol, really, dream.
That's so crazy.
And I was, partner, youngest partner at the firm, but I was 330 pounds, and I was like really close to having a serious, serious medical problem for the rest of my life that probably wasn't going to be very long.
Well, and for context, what do you weigh right now? Just so people understand.
Like 165 or something.
Yes,
like that. Yeah.
Half.
Yeah, half. I had to lose half my body weight, but I had this sort of this moment where I realized that I went through all of this mainstream education, right? Went to the University of Virginia. I'm working on Wall Street. I'm ranked as one of the top traders in the world at what I'm doing, but I don't know anything about taking care of my body. I never learned anything about spirituality. I never learned anything about physical health, emotional health, mental health. All I had learned was how to be a producer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, it's interesting now that I'm thinking about it, because the producer, like I said, was the stomach. And sort of the shadow side of being that producer might have been what was showing up in my huge gut that I was walking around with.
Oh, shit.
Right? What was I trying to fill with that? But my inspiration for all of this, and really the importance, I think, of this conversation is, how do we educate in kindergarten about these kinds of things? Learning about the physical body, learning about Paul Chek's 4 doctors, learning about emotions and how to take care of your mind, learning about breathing and moving and pooping and sleeping and meditating, and how to really cultivate and nourish the soul of our children, to teach them about spirituality, teach them about, the problems of having dogmatic, closed-minded belief systems, exposing them to all sorts of various things, and then see what their hearts pull them into, and trusting in that wisdom.
Yeah, so let's get practical with this. How old are your kids?
I have a 2, a 6, and an 8.
Okay,
Yeah.
So probably more so for the 6 and 8-year-old, but what does that practically look like? How are you showing up differently than a traditional dad might?
Oh man, well, I was talking about this with Chase earlier. That's really the big balance for people that are super motivated like ourselves. Like, how do we balance wanting to produce something in the world, make an impact, take care of our own bodies, be with our wife or husband or partner, be with our children, be with our friends, and how do we fit all of these things in? But I think the ultimate thing for children really is, at that age, they're mirroring us. And so when we're showing up in our fullness, if they see us exercising, if they see us meditating, if we're doing that with them, if we're just being a good example and we're showing them like what life really can be, and we live with this vitality and this fullness and this purposefulness, that's contagious. I think in terms of the children, it's trying to find the balance between guiding them and setting boundaries, and then also recognizing them as a very wise soul and recognizing the wisdom in their bodies. Like, if your kid comes up to you and says, 6-year-old, I don't want to eat this, well, we might say, well, you got to eat, you got to have protein. You got to have protein. Well, Dad, I don't like that. Well, no, you got to eat that. But what if inside there is a soul that in a past life was like a vegetarian or something? And it's like the idea of, a yogi sitting there, and the idea of having that piece of meat is just repulsive to their soul, right? Or there's some sort of wisdom in their body that they're going through some sort of change or some kind of detoxification process where they might need that. And so how to look at your children as both your children and guiding them, but also as your teachers. I think that the evolution of souls coming in, especially imagine a soul being born at this particular time, being born into like this COVID type era. I feel as if they're like, we're iPhone 6 and they're iPhone like 13, right?
Yeah.
They have a lot more, I don't know, technology, it seems to me, and finding the balance between tapping into that and listening to that, and then also, guiding them without trying to be too dogmatic based on, the way we think things need to be for them.
Yeah, I love that. And I think one of the things you're touching on here, and it's something I've talked about before, but it's, well-intended parents, unfortunately, they come in and they make their children question their intuition, and eventually they stop trusting it because everything that their intuition is saying is going against what mom and dad have for rules.
Totally.
And then eventually they just abandon it. And I think for me, one of the places where I was really able to tap into it was as a trader, right? You and I know that there's math involved, but there's such a feel to when to buy, when to sell, all that you can't explain. I just fucking knew. Not always right, but I just knew, and you had the hunch and you went on it. But for the most, I would say most of my life, it's been about rediscovering that now. And like, what does it mean for me to really trust that sacral energy when it's a yes, just to go with it, and when it's anything but, it's a fucking no. And that's been a hard one for me.
Well, there's a couple of things there. I mean, one of the things that people don't realize when they're trading is that it's a living entity. Paul Tudor Jones used to call the market Mr. Market. There was a personality and a relationship to it. And, I'd go as far as saying it'd probably be better to be called Mrs. Market, because it can, act a lot more nonlinear and a little bit emotional than men sometimes do.
I like
right?
that.
Yeah. So it's like, imagining the market as like a female being that's the collective of all minds that are focusing on that. And so
Whoa,
there's a sense
that just tripped me out a little bit. I literally finally, for the first time ever, thought about like, that makes so much sense.
Right. And so, you can even study like I'm sure you're familiar with like Fibonacci sequences and things like that. So, if you look in nature and you look at, like, let's say the way that a shell spirals and forms, or, from a shell on the beach to like even probably like a turtle shell, or, the dimensions of a leaf. There's these Fibonacci sequences, these sequences of numbers that are found in nature. And, people have found that by, just by looking at the charts, that over long periods of time and also short periods of time, the markets actually move in these Fibonacci sequences as well, in terms of like, the retracements and the peak to troughs kinds of experiences. And so, that's another just example, and there are many more, but that's an example of how the market is a living entity, and it's acting under the same principles that nature is also operating under.
Which isn't logical. And I think a lot of times we would try to put logic into, there's no way but it's, how can it follow this pattern? It's because we are energy. This whole thing is so much more complex.
How logical and linear are our emotions?
Yeah.
Right. Just look around the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I think Alan Greenspan had this quote that said, the market can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. Right.
Yeah.
And so, having a plan of what can go wrong is actually a really important part of trading. One of the things Paul would have us do is each year we'd have to write sort of like a manifesto to ourselves about what we were going to do in a drawdown. Right? Because when you start losing money, if you're going down 2%, 3%, 5%, 10%, you're not thinking rationally. You're in this trade. You have this theory. At this point, you've probably closed down all of the winners just to like invest in this one loser because you're so married to this idea. And then you're just not acting rationally at that point. So we had what we called a drawdown memo, which was before the year started, stating, okay, if I go down 3%, I'm not going to change anything because I need to risk at least 3 to 5% in order to make, 12 to 15%, which is what, I'm expected to do. But if I go down 6 to 10%, okay, I'm going to cut my position size in half. I'm going to have this level of risk on overnight. I'm going to have, right? And so, I think that's an important part of bringing the more linear and logical into the irrational. realizing that you're dealing with something that can be unpredictable and the path is completely uncertain. And in fact, just like life and just like coaching, the process is everything, right? You can have the right thesis in trading, but like, say, crypto may go to Ethereum may go to 10,000, but it may go to, I don't know,
$10,
zero first, right? So you can be right, but if you don't have the plan and the path for how to get there, that's the path is everything. The process is everything in trading. And that really connects into coaching. And in fact, there are so many similarities that I've found in trading as in coaching and in life.
Let's investigate that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, right now I've been studying at the Process Work Institute and I'm calling myself a life process coach. And, when I was trading and I would put together these presentations to talk about trading, and I didn't know anything about life process or anything at that point, but the number one rule I had was actually the number one rule is be able to describe how it is that you make money. What is your edge in one sentence at a 5th grade reading level?
It wasn't, don't talk about Fight Club.
Right. So, most people don't know how to answer that question in their job. If you think about what it is that truly makes you successful at podcasting and being able to put that into 1 to 2 sentences so that, you could talk to your kids and that they could understand it. Right. That's taking the complex and putting it into simplicity. And that's a sign of somebody who really knows what they're doing. People can take things complex.
I'm working it out right now. I'm trying to work out that sentence. And I think I may just let it pass right now.
Well, that was just
no, I like it though.
Just an idea, right? But so that's the first thing is really understand what it is.
I'm going to let it go. I think I was about to do it again. Okay. I digress.
What's stopping you from saying that?
Yeah. No, I actually really want to. Here's what's stopping. I don't want to sound like an asshole. Yeah, I want it to be, I want to be able to articulate it in a way that is clear. But I also, there's the part that I need to own whatever part of this is my genius. And there's a fear in being considered boastful in doing that.
Right. So there's a lot of things that I would work with you on that in this moment. For example, you're making certain hand signals, right?
Yeah.
So our body, so there's an edge there. So, here you are, you want to say something, but
badly,
you want to pull on the secondary process, but there's an edge there, which is could be considered a ghost roll. Somebody saying to you, don't say that right now. You're going to sound like an asshole.
Yeah.
And that might be your parents. That might be your society, your religion, whatever it is. Right. So that's like that Brutus in a different.
Could be my daughter.
It could be anybody. So there are these edge figures that hold us back from our full potential and from being our full self. Now, that can sometimes be a good thing because there may be an edge figure that says, you shouldn't run down the street naked because you might wind up in prison, right? And so that's a good time to keep the lid on. But often we're kind of keeping the lid on.
But maybe true freedom is waiting for me in that jail cell. Maybe.
Well,
I don't really want to test out that hypothesis, but just I'm going to throw it out there.
You'll get a lot of quiet time.
Okay. I'm going to give it a shot. So what is it that makes me successful as a podcaster? Is that what you would say?
Yeah, I would just say, what is it about that differentiates your podcast from any other podcast?
Oh God, one sentence. You're right. That's a bitch. It's showing up with integrity and vulnerability to create a safe space to explore whatever it is we're getting into in the podcast. And I kind of fucked up the last part of that, but it's really to create a safe space for you as the guest to share openly and honestly in a way that resonance will actually land for people versus coming up here with questions, you being the expert, you just spitting off the canned answers.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I'll listen to those podcasts too. And there's some value in there, some utility there. But at the end of the day, what I love about this conversation is there's a frequency that goes out that hits someone. The beauty is they don't even know exactly what, something shifts in them. And that's, I think, why one of the reasons I do this.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's great. And I really feel that when I'm here, in this space. And that is so important because, our words are our frequency. And so if we're talking, if we're in a place of integrity, if we're harmonized ourselves and we're letting those words flow through us, that's reaching the audience and that's reaching everybody that we talk to. And that's really the beauty of Sanskrit, just to kind of digress or maybe
let's go down that rabbit hole.
It's like,
how long have you been studying this, by the way? I was listening to you on Ryan's podcast and it was like, dude, you're deep into the Sanskrit.
Yeah, I'm really into it. Honestly, I haven't been into it for that long. I have to come at it from sort of a place of humbleness and humility in that, one of the things about the Vedic knowledge is that it's Abrahamic religions have a book, one book, right? The Bible, the Torah, the Quran. The Vedas have a library. And so there's so much information that I'm not by no means considering myself anywhere near to a scholar in this, or do I even think in this lifetime that I would even have the possibility of doing that, even if I dedicated the rest of my life to it. Maybe if I did that, which is not what I'm going to do because I have children and life and all sorts of things that I'm interested in. But I have found it to be extremely helpful. So yeah, I met a teacher named Jeffrey Armstrong, Kavindra Rishi, and he has just downloaded to me all of this amazing knowledge. And I'm very grateful for that. And for all of the word is acharya. And so we have the word from chariot and also car, right? And so it's like the one that can carry the knowledge from generation to generation. An acharya is someone who walks the way that they talk, right? And so I've met this amazing acharya, Jeffrey, and he's given me this information, and I've just felt so enriched by it that I feel so inspired to share it. The English language is a very, very limited language, right? We have one word that we talk about all the time, love, right? It's like, but we say, I love my dog. I love my wife. I love my child. I love my grandmother. I love pizza. I love lamp, right? It's like all of these different things that we say love to, but in Sanskrit, they have words for all of those different kinds of rasas or those dances. The love you have with source, the love you have with your wife, the love you have for a pet. There's like descriptive words that can be defined over multiple pages. And so it's such a scientific, specific language. And all of these syllables and all of these sounds carry frequency with them that puts us into a state of having a direct experience, right? So Sanskrit is what they call the most perfect language. And from a trading perspective, I think you're going to love this because it's basically an unchangeable language. So the same verses that have been proven by a man named Nilesh Oak. So the Bhagavad Gita is something that I study. And the Mahabharata is, the Bhagavad Gita is 701 verses. So it's quite short. It's sort of like the guidebook or like a map of the larger text. The Bhagavad Gita, which is an amazing book, sits inside of the Mahabharata, which is 100,000 verses. Okay, so I haven't even tried to approach that. I've been mostly focusing on the Bhagavad Gita. But the Mahabharata has something like 300 solar lunar references in the text about the exact positioning of the sun and the moon and the planets. And so this guy, Nilesh Oak, was able to take all this information, put it in a computer, and through modern technology, was able to date that to about 7,500 years ago. So the way that the Sanskrit was downloaded and written down 7,500 years ago, or actually at the time was probably just memorized, but that is completely unchanged to this day. And I'll give you the reasons why.
They don't have a King James version?
Well, so, think about like Old English and Shakespeare, right? A couple hundred years ago, we were talking in Old English. You can't even understand that now, let alone if right now we went to different parts of our country. People are talking completely different ways and using words completely.
I grew up in Maine, bro. We talk funky up there.
And compare that to Texas or Alabama or California. It's completely different, right? So Sanskrit, what does it have? First of all, it has this astrological references to hold it in its place and time. Okay. It has specific pronunciations. So the letters of the alphabet are said in a specific way in your mouth so that, with this is how you say this letter, and that those rules are held. It has over 4,000 grammatical rules in order to keep everything kind of in check. Every single word in Sanskrit reduces down to one of 2,000 etymological roots. Okay. They conjugate 4 different parts of the sentence. So, in Spanish, it's like yo to instead, and then, the verb will be conjugated so that you can, what tense it's in, right?
Sure.
In English, we don't have that at all. And Sanskrit has 4 different parts of the sentence. So the noun, the verb, the adjective, and the adverb are all conjugated to hold this sort of specificity. It also has, it's also read in the Gayatri meter, which is a specific type of poetry rhythm in order to make it be easy to memorize. There's probably many more things in there.
I would guess, just given what you've said, holy jeez.
But that's what I'm remembering at the moment. But the point is that when you're using Sanskrit words, you have this, you can get this specificity about spirituality. We have like these words like God, spiritual, love. But if you ask anybody what that means, they all come up with a completely different definition of that, right? So it's completely kind of a mess and non-specific. So Sanskrit gave me a language to talk about and to understand these sort of spiritual concepts. And in addition, when you're saying these words in the right way, the way that they were intended and downloaded from, in their purest form and unchanged over time, you're having a direct experience. And that's why when you start singing mantras, you get this joy, this ecstasy, this what they call shanti, this contentment that just naturally emerges inside of you just from resonating with that frequency.
Dude, we were just at a retreat at Zion National Park, and we were able to do yoga every morning, Kundalini yoga. And I remember the last day we went into the session, and before we went into this one Kriya, I guess is what they call it.
Okay.
She was like, look, these longer ones, like you just got to commit to like, you're going to do this for the rest of your life and just get it out of your head that there's going to be an end to it. And then it'll make it be, kind of be more tolerable. And which was great advice because this one was 31 minutes long, the same mantra, the same motions. And I did just feel, with the exception of my thumbs being numb, I felt I was being lifted into some other energetic with just, kind of that probably the energy of the mantra.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to just riff on that for a second. So, the first thing that's interesting is in this country is that we say yoga, but what we're referring to really is asana or movement practice, right? Yoga is actually a worldview. It's a philosophy of not really, religion's not the right word, but a way of living, a spiritual sense, and a science, right? And asana, the movement practice, is one component of a much larger system. Most people, which is a great thing, are doing asana practice and calling it yoga. But before you even get to the asana practice, there's what they call the yams and the niyams. And I'm not an expert on all of them, but they're basically practices that you have to do to take care of yourself, proper diet, let's just call them 4 doctors: sleeping, moving, drinking water, cleanliness, right? And then there's another step of how you are in relationship to others, into community, in your relationships, how you communicate, what kind of, are you living out your dharma or your purpose? And are you doing it in a way that's not inflicting harm on others? They have the word ahimsa, which is incorrectly translated as nonviolence, right? And this is kind of like what kind of came with Gandhi, is this whole concept of nonviolence. But, you know, my understanding of that, and this is not to knock Gandhi at all, but that it's really not about never being violent. It's about doing what you have to do to protect the innocent and those you love, doing what you have to do to live dharmically or according to your purpose on this planet while having the least impact on others. It's not about actually never having any kind of harm. It's about only doing it when it's in the context of protecting the innocent, right? You know, this is a little bit on a sidetrack, and I'll have to come back to the asana. But in the olden days, you know, Mother Earth, which is a deva called Durga, okay, warriors before they would go and kill somebody else in war, right? And compare this to like what we have going on now, like in Russia and Ukraine and all these wars around the earth. But the warriors would go and pray. Pray is not the right word either, but sing mantras to Durga, to Mother Earth, asking for her permission in order to go and kill one of her children, and basically having to prove that this has to be done because I'm protecting my community and my family, and I have no other choice. And this is my dharma. I'm a warrior, and I have to do this. And having to wait until you experience that level of congruency in your mantra and in your practice so that you can go with complete integrity, that you have the permission of this personified law of nature. And, you know, compare that to the way that we're acting now. So it's not about just being violent. It's about being violent when you absolutely need to. But anyway, this is getting to all of these things are first to be done before a guru even would give you an asana practice. And then that asana practice would lead on to a breath practice, pranayama. And that breath practice would then lead to a meditation practice and a mantra practice, and learning how to use your discernment or your buddhi faculty, you know, how to use the faculties of your mind to make decisions. And all of that leads up to samadhi, which it means the same as being one with, you know, one with the source and having this full-on direct experience. And so yoga is just so incredibly and so broad. And it's great that all of these people, hundreds of millions of people around the world, are now doing asana practices because it's just the start. But, you know, really expanding out to other parts of yoga and realizing what the ultimate goal of this movement practice is not to be more, you know, ripped. It's actually to prepare your body to do the breath work, to do the breath work to be able to calm your mind, you know, and sing mantras so that you have this direct experience. That's the whole point of it. It's not to just like, you know, get really sweaty and, you know,
get a good workout.
Get a good workout in.
Check
right?
check that movement box off for the day.
Right. And so, you know, if you think about it, because this is just getting back to your point about when, you know, the positions of the asanas, the movement practices within yoga are basically using the technology of the body, sort of like a radio antenna, right? So we have cell phones that receive wireless information from the internet. The cells in our body are connected to what could be called the internet, right? And so when we're putting ourselves through these postures and going in different positions, we're using this wireless technology system to receive information from the cosmos and from and kind of put it in the internet, right? And so that's sort of what you were experiencing, I think, when you were doing that yoga. And one thing I would add to that is like mantras and yoga are like, it's like, to me, it's like flavors of ice cream. Okay. You don't want to get stuck into just like, okay, this is just one mantra. I'm just going to have missionary position for the rest of my life. Okay.
Yeah. Well, you guys don't do that? You guys haven't fully committed to that?
I'm not going to go 100% missionary, right? Like right now I want to sing to the divine feminine part. And now I want to, you know, sing to the part that helps me remove obstacles. And now I want to sing to the part that does this or that. And now I want to do this type of movement practice because I feel like that's what I need, or I want to tap into a certain sort of flavor of the medicine.
Well, this all for me segues back to how the fuck did you go from baller weather trader to sitting here today just dropping bombs about Sanskrit?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a fucking evolution.
Well, it's funny because
And maybe start back too. Also, I would love, I mean, the people that were in your house that you had access to, these titans of trading.
Yeah.
Like that's not to be overlooked either.
No, I was certainly like extremely, privileged in a lot of ways. And I want to own up to that, is that, while I didn't have a lot of exposure to, vulnerability or expressing your emotions or a spiritual practice or even how to eat, right? I did have a lot of guidance to what became my dream, which is to be, a successful trader and be a Wall Street guy.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's funny, the eating part, they're notoriously terrible eaters, traders. And I was actually
terrible.
I would say the last 4 or 5 years of my trading career, I'd gotten into CrossFit and started to learn a lot about nutrition. So I was eating a lot better than basically everybody else.
Yeah.
But just I was looking around the pit and like what they were eating is like, oh my God.
Oh yeah. I've seen it all too. I've experienced that. So yeah, I started out my earliest dreams in life were to be a drummer, to drum. And I was interested in magic. And this gets back to like
what type of drumming though? Like in a band or actually drumming?
You had like a drum set from a very early age. Yeah. And it's like, there was nothing around me that would have inspired me to do that. My parents didn't drum. My parents weren't musical, but that, and the same with magic. And so, to me, there's no question that I came in with that inclination from a past life, that somehow I had this desire to have these skills and talents. And, as being a good parent, right. And recognizing that these are the things that I'm naturally pulled to from a young age without having any other influence. Those are the things that should be cultivated, right? And to some extent they were in my family, but what happened was that a new dream emerged, which was to become a successful businessman, as I, watched my dad and kind of got more enculturated with all of the belief systems around me. And, from a very young age, I got exposed to all of these great experiences. My dad in the late 80s and the early 90s was working at hedge funds, and hedge funds were just really beginning. And it was like,
I just, on a recommendation, I just picked up the book that's right behind you, More Money Than God. And I'm about 3 chapters in, and it's fucking fascinating.
Yeah.
Have you read it yet?
No, I haven't. No.
Probably be super interesting for you as well, because you actually lived that part of the world that I didn't.
Totally. Yeah. So thank you for that. Yeah. So it like back in the 80s and the 90s, it was just so exciting because, there were only a handful of hedge funds, and my dad was working for one, and it was a very kind of close-knit community at the time. And it was just like, if we thought the era that we were in was sort of like the Wild West, it's like there were not really a lot of rules. There were very eccentric people. People were coming into a lot of money at that time in the 80s and 90s, and were using it in very kind of creative and, interesting ways. And so I just felt like the excitement and the energy of how much fun and, it was very like fraternal atmosphere. It was sort of like being on a sports team. It was just this like really great energy. So from the time I was about 11, 12 years old, I was like, this is what I'm going to do with my life. So, Paul Tudor Jones had put out a trading video about on a PBS special back in the late 80s. And it was very interesting because there were these rumors that later came out that he was actually sort of embarrassed by it because he was, just a young guy, and he was sort of like kind of showing off a little bit in the video. And I think he later had, really kind of developed into more of a fine wine and more of a maturity about himself. And so there were rumors that he had gone out and bought out every copy of the trading video.
Oh, no shit.
And so like, there were periods of time where you couldn't even find it. I don't know if it exists now on the internet, but it was kind of an interesting legend about that video. But I had a copy of it, VHS tape, and I played it over and over and over again in my room until the thing broke inside the machine. And, I just was like, this is what I want to do. Right. I just felt this freedom, this creativity, this competitive spirit of trading. And then I was just exposed to all of these interesting things. Like, one day, my dad comes home and tells me that, Paul Tudor Jones had just bought this brand new limousine and had a bad day of trading and just gave the keys away because he thought it was bad luck. And he gave it to this guy, Mark Dalton, who was the president of the company. And the next day he's showing, driving to our house to hang out with my dad, and he drives himself in the limousine. Just like, things like that. I'm like, what the hell is going on over there? Like, I want a piece of that. Right.
Yeah.
And, going back a little bit, one thing that I'll just say is that in process work, what we study somebody's first childhood dream or earliest childhood experiences that they remember. And when I was 7 years old, I came home with my first report card to my mom, and I was going to give it to my mom. And there was this idea that if you had a good report card, you'd get a present, you'd get rewarded. And so I walk into the room, I hand this report card to my mom, and, it's really, I don't really know exactly the way it went down, but my experience of it was that this report card was not good enough to get the reward. And, I flipped out, I threw myself back in the air, and I smashed my head on this flower pot and cracked the pot. And, it ensues where, my mom's now taking me to the hospital and like holding my head, and, the story goes on, and I'll try to weave that all in of how that's purposeful now in my life. But what happened is, in that moment, it set up both paradoxically a core wound that success is through appreciation coming from external sources.
Yeah, I was going to say something
and achievement,
an arbiter
and achievement. But at the same time, it set up my core power, which is what drove me to, be an amazing student and go to the top of industry. Right. So all of this time now I'm living out this myth without even knowing it, of just getting excited by all of this achievement and all this accomplishment, and realizing that that's exactly what I wanted to do. And so, I was exposed to these great environments. I went down to the University of Virginia. I totally just focused on trading. It's the only thing I cared about when I was there. That and partying, of course.
Yeah.
And then I left there, and I quickly, got a job as a weather trader, which was a really interesting thing. Weather trading, most people probably don't understand what that is, but.
Well, dude, I remember when it came, I was at the CME, and I remember them talking about weather futures coming on. I'm like, what? Yeah. Like, I understood it because of the crops and all that, but I'm like, how the fuck do you even trade that?
Yeah. Well, just like, we don't have to go too far into this, but the idea that, you can look at, on a future basis, right? On a futures contract, like right now we're sitting here in May. So let's say we're talking about June Austin weather. There's an average temperature that June Austin weather is. Maybe it's pretty hot here. Maybe the average high is like 95 degrees or something in June. And let's say the average low is 75. And so they have this idea of like an 85 degree we'll use as reference, and you can look back, say the last 10 years, 30 years, 50 years, there's a lot of historical data on Austin weather. And so, the June futures contract without any information, let's say would be trading at 85 degrees. But for some reason, if I think it's going to be warmer than that, based on, let's say, my meteorologist, who was my partner's prediction, I might buy 85 degrees Fahrenheit for a certain amount of dollars per degree. And then if it comes in at 86, I'm getting paid, just like if you buy anything and it goes up or down, right? But then there's all these sort of secondary influences of weather that we got into. Like, for example, weather influences all of the energy products, right? If it's really cold in the winter in New York, we're drawing on so much more energy than if it was warm. The same thing with heating oil or even crude oil to some extent. The same thing goes with all the crops, all of the CME crops, right? So, corn, soybeans, wheat, all of the other little things that come off of the different variations of that. Also cocoa, sugar, coffee, orange juice.
So this was almost like a missing link to all these other commodities and their price action.
Yeah. So what we would do is we sort of had this almost like a Rolodex of events and time. So we knew at particular times of the year when the weather sensitivity was the highest to these various products. So for example, in the Midwest in July, when we're having all of this terrible monocropped 200 million acres of GMO corn and soybeans, unfortunately being grown, that's really ruining all of our soils and probably going to cause a serious famine if it hasn't already. But these, obviously when you're trading, you're not thinking about that. But, all these,
especially if you're not as down with Sanskrit as you are right now.
Well, so these 200 million acres of corn, wheat, and soybeans, they're highly susceptible to weather. And so in July, depending on if it's too hot or if it's not hot enough, or if there's too much rain or not enough rain, all of these factors impact the output of how much yield there is, right? And it's just simple economics of supply and demand. You know what the demand's going to be, and we're focusing on the supply in that situation. You know, if we're looking at energy, the supply is more known, but the demand isn't based on how cold or warm it is in the winter, or how warm or cold it is in the summer. So what you do as a weather trader is, at least this is what we did, is we kind of just rolled around the world from northern hemisphere to southern hemisphere as the seasons are changing and as these various crops are going through their stages of planting to, germination, whatever, all the way to harvest, and knowing what times the weather is sensitive to those products, and then looking for arbitrations, or like looking for opportunities based on what is being priced in terms of, are people really leaning to the warm side and we think it's a good, better propensity to go colder, for example, and then putting on the correct play.
Well, tell me this, does the weather pattern in, let's say, Bali right now, maybe that's not a great example, but maybe something that's a little closer, whatever. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. Does that inform, like if there's a blip in the radar there,
100%.
That informs
100%.
what's going to be happening to our crops here?
It's a great hologram. It's a great metaphor for life, because, we're all breathing the same air. We all have we all share the same oceans, right? We all, for the most part, are sharing the same food. We are one organism. It doesn't matter how many lines we put on a piece of paper, right?
Yeah.
To split it all up into, countries, states, counties, towns, developments, et cetera. But it's all one, right? So we experience in New York, cloudy skies from forest fires in California, 3 days before, right? And all of a sudden I can't watch the sunset because the clouds gray, the sky's gray. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? And then I'm realizing this is from, a big fire 3,000 miles away in California, right? So we're all one system, but just in terms of weather, what we do is we look at, historical weather patterns. We call them analogs, look at what the position of the jet stream and various things that were going on in past years. One of the biggest influences is ocean temperatures. Ocean temperatures, going up and down have a huge correlation to the temperature in various parts of the world. And, the same kinds of things that are happening as you see a setup in the jet stream that sets up cold, in this part of the world in China. And, that correlates to something that may happen in southeastern United States. And you just basically go back, and a good meteorologist would study the history and say, okay, this particular pattern right now looks like 1946, 1972, 1999. Okay, well, 4 out of 5 times it was cold with an average of, 3 degrees below normal. And, the one time, one outlier was only 1 degree above. Okay, so our risk reward is pretty good to bet on this based on this particular global setup right now. And this is what might come over the next 2 to 4 weeks based on what happened over the 2 to 4 weeks previously.
Dude, this is such a different type of trading than, I was in the pit, interest rate options, you're looking at some macro stuff, but ultimately we weren't taking the long-term bet. We weren't looking at stuff and analyzing charts, and certainly,
but that's all okay, because everyone needs to know what their one sentence is.
Yeah, no. And that's what's so fascinating for me, that yes, we're traders, but we're two completely different systems within that. So it's fascinating to.
Well, there's a huge continuum, right, of traders, from computers to humans, and then along that continuum, there's a million different variations of what people are doing and how they look at the world and how they make money. Some of the people that I was trading against, for example, I might be buying Austin, Texas, because I think it's going to be warm just based off of speculative opinion. But there might be an energy producer that is going the other way because they need to hedge their exposure to their customers, or, a farmer that wants to lock in a particular price on their crop and, isn't willing to take the risk of the price going down and is willing to give up the upside, right? So there's a million different ways, even within markets, that people are looking at them. And then of course, across markets, or, across the full spectrum of trading, there's just like really an unlimited sort of strata of variations and ways to cut it up. One of the interesting things about what you said though, about this global weather pattern, that I had an epiphany at the very end of my trading before I retired. And I can tell a little bit more about that progression, but just to tell this interesting story, we were looking at an analog, I believe in 2016, November. And we were looking at that, expecting that it was going to be 2016 November was a very warm month in the United States. And we were predicting that it was going to be, we were having an inclination that it was going to be a big reversal to a cold December, right? And one of the things that we were noticing was that this December, I think 1963 to the previous November of that same year was the same, like an exact pattern. And what I had realized at that time was that time in 63 in November was when Kennedy was shot. And the November of 16 was when Trump was elected. And I realized that it was a very interesting thing, and that not only did the weather pattern look the same, but what if the intensity of the event globally of like a Kennedy being shot was enough to shift the weather pattern back to its other extreme? And what if the time that Trump being elected could have this like almost emotional response where the weather system itself was interacting with the humans on the planet, right? In that way, and then make it go colder. And in fact, it did. It worked out to be a very extremely cold December. And it was a little bit late in my career, so it didn't really have that big of an impact on me, but it was more about figuring that out and seeing that relationship that was even more special than walking away with any amount of money from that, that idea, right?
That's incredible. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's
so yeah, they say a butterfly flaps its wings and like, it affects the whole world, right? Yeah. It's one system. We're all in this together.
How did you wake up from all of this? I know part of it is your journey from 330 down to 165.
Yeah. So I was trading along, I was doing really well. And I just couldn't get my act together on my weight. I had been struggling with it. And over the 4 years before I went to tutor, from when I graduated to when I was at tutor, I was just focusing completely on work, and it was surrounded in a very stressful environment. And it was like my whole life was invested in making money. And, like there's an attitude of, we'll bring food to you so you don't even get up off the trading floor because it's too important that you don't miss a trade.
Yes.
But they're bringing in like the absolute crappiest food, right? The cheapest, not really kind of the cheapest, but just like, the catering of the crap. And so then you're never even getting up and you're working all the time, and the markets never close. They close for a few hours and then they're back open by like 6, 7 o'clock at night. And really they open up Sunday nights. The only time they really close is Saturday, right? It's like this like full on stress experience from, morning, noon, and night. You wake up in the morning and you're looking at your phone before you're getting out of bed and you're seeing, oh shit, I'm down $20 million. I haven't even showered yet. What is that momentum for your day? Or the other thing, I'm up $20 million and like, woohoo, this is the greatest day ever. But it's all like this huge adrenaline rush and this huge reliance on this external thing for whether or not you're going to be up or you're going to be down. Right. And so, I reached a point in 2007 or 2007 where I was 330 pounds.
When did you start trading? I just want to give people some context.
Well, I had really thought about it solely when I was a young teenager. When I went to college, I had internships, and then I really focused on it in college. And 2002, when I was 21, 22, graduating from college, I got my first job as an assistant weather trader.
Okay. And then you joined.
This was tutor. I joined tutor, 4 years later in 2006. And this is like probably 1 year into tutor. Mm-hmm. And I'm just in a really bad place. I got this leg infection, wound up in the hospital where I don't even know how I got it, but all of a sudden my legs started turning purple.
Fuck.
I was like super overweight. I was just like sweaty wherever I went, just like really tough. Couldn't find clothes that could fit. Just super uncomfortable, just like the worst feeling. And so I had this sort of moment where I'm like, I got to get my shit together. And so I started exercising. I met this trainer named Csaba, who's this Hungarian kind of Russian mentality of really like a CrossFit mentality of like no pain, no gain, get into the gym, before work, after work, 7 days a week, no stretching, no warm up, just go.
Hungarians don't fuck with them.
They're intense.
They get shit done.
And to his defense is I kind of, in a lot of ways, really, there's not a lot of ways to get 170 pounds off, but by just, busting ass.
Oh, for sure.
But so, I got to the point where I lost 170, now it's 160-ish pounds. And it took about 1.5 to 2 years to get all the way down there. And I did it just from pure exercise and starting to change my diet and starting to change my lifestyle a little bit, not going out and drinking as much and kind of getting more sleep and all the things that started to emerge. And I got to a point where I thought I was a total stud. And we sent this video to Paul Chek because Chaba had known about Paul and had taken a course or two with him, and they had spent some time together previously. So we sent Paul this video and says, look at this fucking stud. He just lost 170 pounds. Look at him doing these squats and this and that. And Paul wrote back and goes, this guy went from soggy white bread to a burnt piece of toast. He needs to take 2 years off from exercising. And when I received that, like, I almost had a panic attack, because I had realized that my whole life now was exercise.
You're so attached to that.
The same way that I had focused on trading and that excessive lifestyle of partying to the nth degree, always having to spend the most money, having the biggest crew, riding around in this, crazy limousine, and doing all the wildest stuff to the same degree that I now stopped that. I just transferred that same intensity into exercise.
Oh, brother, that's been my journey, the intensity. And that's, as I was doing my working in and really cultivating that, I remember Peyton at one point was so frustrated with me. I'm like, why the fuck? Like, I'm doing all the things. I'm trying to, create a softer, better version of me for everybody. And she's like, yeah, but the intensity, like, you're fucking hard to be around. It's not that zen, dude.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So I basically, what I would say was I had just transferred my addiction to something more socially acceptable.
Uh-huh.
Now people could look at me and not be disgusted. Now people can look, would applaud me for what I had done. But I realized that I just transferred this addiction.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's when my inner journey really started to come in. This is around 2008 or 2009. I met a great meditation teacher that was perfect for me at the time. I started practicing Tai Chi with a wonderful master, William C. Chen in New York City, who I still study with. And I have just a love affair with him, this 85-year-old Tai Chi master that has just been such an incredible influence in my life. And then that ultimately led to my first visit to see Paul Chek in around 2010 at his house in Vista, California. And that's when I had my first shamanic experience. And that just blew me open to all of these different new possibilities and all of these things that were secondary to my way of being and really changed me. That started just this deep thirst and quest for finding out who I am, working with the best people, the best teachers, the best masters, studying myself, studying with the sort of this same kind of way that I attack trading, but now it's like more towards a purposeful goal that's really helping me heal. And I was starting to ask big questions like, who am I? Who am I really? Why am I here? What am I doing?
The curiosity like leads to that inquiry, right?
Curiosity led to it. And it was just like, I couldn't get enough. And I just would study and practice and started really living this. And I became what I would call a Zen trader, right? So all of a sudden we had these rows of desks and I had them cut my desk out, literally cut it out and put in the first standing desk. What may have been one of the first standing desks on Wall Street. And, everybody was looking at me like, who the hell is this guy? Everyone's sitting all day and there's one guy standing. Right. And I lower it down and go in a Swiss ball. And then I had this thing where this cushion I could kneel on, and then I'd sit in a chair, and then I'd stand, and then I'd stand with like a split stance. And I do all of these things all day of course I was doing them for my own health, but I also started to realize that by incorporating these things, I was a much more optimized trader. And so it started to improve my performance.
Did anybody decide to cut their desk out?
Well, yeah, we'll get there. So then I start bringing...
Settle down, chief. Let me tell my goddamn story.
No, it's good. It's good. But the answer is yes. but it took a long time.
Yeah.
But, I started incorporating organic food, bringing my own food to work. I started, exercising at work, meditating at work. I started to bring my own water and kind of learn about feng shui and set up, move myself off the trading floor into a private office with plants and with exercise equipment and a massage chair and, even like, foosball, just to like keep it fun with my partner. I started understanding about the impacts of EMF, and I started shielding my office and realizing that they had all these repeaters up in the ceiling and pulled them out and all of these different kinds of things, and sort of creating this sort of healthier way of being. You see, like, I don't think that business and health need to be separated, right? There's this idea that we can be dharmic and be successful. We can do the right things, not only for ourselves, but for the world. We can be beautiful and bountiful, but that's so separated. And so I started to realize that not only did these things make me healthier and did I enjoy them, but they actually made me a better trader. And that went on for years. And that really did ultimately, to answer your question, have an effect on others. It took a long time, but then about 4 or 5 years after I put my standing desk in, they redid the entire trading floor and put in 400 standing desks.
400.
Yeah. And they started bringing in better quality food into the cafeteria, and they start becoming more mindful about the little things and creating a space for meditation and creating a space for yoga and things like that, and starting to realize it. So that's what Paul would call the silent lover, where, I wasn't sitting in a board meeting where I was like, okay, now we're going to do X, Y, Z, but just based on living that and people witnessing it over time, that the energy of that led into them. So this all led for me until about 2017-ish, where my first wife went through a major extreme state. After having our second child, I think with some serious postpartum depression, which is really something that's tragically overlooked. I think we need to do a lot more research and a lot more support of our women after birth, because, we so quickly just put them back into the environment of supporting us or going back to work without understanding that, like, it really takes, it seems, about 2 years for a woman after birth to really stabilize back to who she was before that experience started. And so my first wife, went through a really tragic extreme state where she was really not centered in reality. And it was just an incredibly hard time for me. I had a 1 and a 2-year-old girl. I was managing $1 billion portfolio at Tudor, and I had my wife going through an extreme state. And so I was holding on for dear life, right? And that ended up in a really messy divorce that we went through, which, turned out to be a beautiful thing, in that we have a great relationship now. Our kids are doing great. I have a new wife and a new son, and, I wouldn't change anything, but it was a very, very difficult time. So, I left that situation with majority custody of my girls that were now 2 years old and 3 years old. And I just had to ask myself and be real, like, am I gonna be awarded, I wouldn't say win, but am I gonna be awarded majority custody and then spend my days at the office trying to make money in Stamford, Connecticut, while my girls are upstate in New York and I'm having somebody else drive them to school and them not being with their mother? So I had to really face that and say,
Wow.
I just cannot be in integrity and do that. And so all of the signs, were leading towards leaving. I started, honestly, my performance wasn't that good. I was obviously really distracted from all those things. And all of the other ideas that had been growing into this Zen traderhood, I realized, like, they actually paradoxically also led me away from trading, because I started to realize that there was so much more to me than just this one industry, right? This one flavor of me. I had so much more. I wanted to spend time meditating. I wanted to spend time doing Tai Chi, and to a lot of extent that helps you with the trading. But when you start to make that the priority, and that you want that to be your life, and trading secondary, well, that's a good way to get your ass kicked, right?
Yeah.
And so I have too much respect for trading to try to think that I could do it with one eye on the ball, And so all of that led to 2019 of just me walking away from that industry and retiring and saying, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I know that there's more for me out in the world, and I want to see if I could, test myself in a new way and do something different. And that's kind of what I've been working on for the last 3 years.
And did people, what was the kind of overall response? Like, dude, you're fucking crazy. You're still killing it. You got this great job. But like, what were the things?
Pretty much.
Or did you get a lot of support?
Yeah, I think I was well supported, but there's all these voices who think like, you have the greatest job in the world. You're a partner at Tutor. Like, you're going to walk away from this. Like, why not do 5 more years? Why not do this? And even the voices inside myself, based on the voices of history, and all of my enculturation, all of these critics.
What about your dad?
Well, I think my dad was supportive. He's always been supportive of me. I think he was probably, if I'm being honest, a little bit.
I'd expect nothing less, but honesty.
A little bit concerned. He probably, asking himself like, why don't you just do a few more years? Just a few more paychecks.
That's, by the way, totally fair, especially
totally
given like
totally normal.
My son's going from, being the top of this game and gonna go meditate. What?
Yeah. So there's definitely that. And then, when you leave the industry, and I'm sure you experience with this, there's like a cycle of experiences we go through, because we go through this own disbelief, regret, shock. Like, I did what? Like, I'm just driving my kids back and forth to school now and have nothing else. The phone's not ringing. The emails aren't going off. Like, who am I? What's my purpose? Why did I just leave this important position to just do, to do nothing? Right. And so, I had to go through all these cycles myself until I realized that the skill set that I had gathered in trading, those same skill sets, for example, of following your process. This is going back to what we were talking about. After the competitive edge, the next and most important thing about trading was having a process. What is the process by which I go about doing this competitive edge? And then it's being a disciple of that process, studying that process, and constantly through feedback, reinventing that process and being willing to adapt and change that process. And I realized that's the same thing that was happening to me now as becoming a therapist, becoming a process worker or a life process coach. It's like, I am watching my clients. First of all, before you even get into the clients, this idea of hunting and stalking your own process, right? I know you had a podcast with a gentleman who was down in an African hunter.
Boyd?
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a lion tracker, not a hunter.
Lion tracker, okay.
Yeah.
So I spent time in a tribe in Namibia where I did a persistence hunt, where I lived with a Kalahari Bushman for 2 weeks, and we hunted animals by running them down. And this was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. But I realized like the same sense of stalking the prey, of tracking, of pacing, right? These are the same skills that were important to trading. How do I pace the market? How do I stalk the market? How do I look for that right opportunity? How do I know exactly when to pull the arrow and hit the bullseye, right? And then I realized, wow, those are the same skill sets that I've learned that are inherent in coaching. How do I stalk my client? How do I pace my client? How do I look for that right opportunity to make an intervention at the right moment, in the right way, at the right feeling, with the right intention, right? At the first time. They call that in Hawaiian culture, they call that kino ole. It's like doing it the right way, with the right feeling, for the right person, the right place, the right time, the first time. Kino ole, right?
Wow.
And so like what I realize is, and I'll just say one more thing, the real thing too, in wanting to become sort of like a wisdom teacher or a coach of some sort is working on yourself. And so you have to be a hunter warrior of your own process. How do I do a recapitulation? How do I do with detachment? Look at my life's events and think about how they've shaped me. What are my preconceived ideas about how life should be or how I might react to a certain situation? With complete detachment, do a life review and stalk yourself so that you can be then bring that level of frequency and that level of awareness to everything you do and to your clients. And so when I realized that the same skill set I had learned was not like I was giving it away, but the essence of that carried forward with me to whatever I do. Then I sort of got over all of those feelings of grief, disbelief, anger, woulda, coulda, shoulda mentality, because I realized I wasn't really giving it up. It just sort of changed forms.
Yeah. Wow. And so I'm curious because we each, both of us and anyone listening, we have our own kind of way that looks. So this is like your coaching is through a life process coach. Is that what they say that right?
Yeah.
My coaching feels like through the podcast. And as I was saying earlier, it's like sending out the resonance for people, not telling them what to do, not saying follow me, but does something here land for you? Is there something in this process of our experience that shifts something in you so that you go have your own experience? And just don't take my word for it or your word for it. But what, that's what I think aim to do with this podcast is coach in that way.
Yeah.
And it's different structure, not just from, I'm not getting paid for this, but it's also.
You should be.
Well, thank you. But it's also, that old paradigm of like the coach tells the client what to do. And I found that even when I have worked with people one-on-one, it's been much more, I just keep seeing myself reflected back in the conversation. Like, what do I need in this moment? And start to share that. And then more often than not, there's the aha moment where the client gets to actually feel and have they kind of come to their own awareness around it. And they're not just taking my word for it.
You said a lot of amazing things. So the first thing is that, we each have our own facilitator or coaching style. Okay. And so knowing your style is just like that one sentence of knowing your competitive edge, knowing what is your primary style as a coach, but also that there are secondary aspects that we're not that in touch with. Like you might be like very direct as a coach, let's just say, and that's really good, but there might be the secondary, like more vulnerable style that you might need to sometimes call in. But knowing our style and what makes us a good coach and being authentic to that is the same thing as knowing your competitive edge in trading, right? And so what you said though about this, what I would say is about curiosity, is the way that you engage with your client was not really by telling them what to do, but by drawing it out of them. And that's called a meta skill, which is like an overarching feeling quality of the way that you connect. And so in this sense, it could be called curiosity. In Native American culture, they would call that a good attitude. The good attitudes, it's like the way in which through you coach or you engage in somebody is like, playfulness, curiosity, inquiry, right? Not giving them the answer, but leading them to it, right? And that's the same thing in process work, is that it's so much more effective when you can help somebody get to the answer themselves. And you may already see it, but actually being patient enough to lead them there through their own process to get to that sort of that nugget. And the last thing I will say is that in my experience, the clients that come to us for whatever they're working on is the same medicine that we need in some other part of our life. We might be a few steps ahead of them in the forest or on the trail. But in reality, if somebody comes in and they're having problems with boundaries, well, the first question I need to ask myself is, where am I at with boundaries? And to the degree that I am boundaryless, walled off or boundaryless, as Terry Real would talk about some of the qualities of the way people are in relationships, I can't help my client, right? And so I've had all of these different kinds of experiences, is in that we're in a shared field. We're sitting in what they call in process work, the process mind, sort of like maybe the mind of God, you would say. And there's a relational field, an exchange that's going on between the client and the therapist. And both of them are experiencing and teaching and learning through this feedback loop. And that's a really important thing. It's not like as therapists, we have it all figured out. Okay, I'm going to sit here. I'm the coach. I'm going to wear something. You're going to lie on the couch and I'm going to sit here in the chair. The reality is I'm just a part of this process as you are. We're both here on a learning journey together. And let's incorporate also the larger field, the space between us and what's going on inside of you to bring all of that in. What I dreamt last night is relevant for our session today, and vice versa.
Yeah. And I love that. And I just keep thinking to this as I'm sharing with someone or working with a client. I'm working it out with my voice so that I hear. It's literally a conversation with myself about where I'm not having boundaries right now. And I start to get to explore that. The coaching sessions for me became, and just like the podcast, the topics that come up, okay, where in my life am I not feeling free in this area? Because there's got to be some part of it that is a little bit locked up. It could be a tiny bit. It could be completely, boundaryless. But whatever it is, it makes me consider right now, this moment in time, where I sit. Because a lot of times we just go through life and we're doing our thing and we're in a flow or whatever, but we're not considering something that's in the shadow, a blind spot that is actually hindering us from, kind of being further down that path.
Totally. And relationships of all kinds are the greatest way to reflect that back to ourselves. And so, what we dislike in the other is usually what we need to look at inside of ourselves, and that's essentially, process work in its essence. And so when an interesting thing that can happen too, as a coach with a client, is that, we're in this feedback loop. And so you may be experiencing something inside of yourself that your client is dreaming up inside of you. Maybe all of a sudden you're a really kind person and you never really get angry. And all of a sudden you're with a client and you're realizing, like, I'm just really angry at this guy. I want to scream at him. And then you have the awareness to notice that that's happening and to realize, okay, that's coming onto my screen. That's not actually me. This person might have trauma from having a really strict father that used to scream at him and tell him what to do, and he could never think for himself, and he was always living in fear. And he's projecting that through me to reflect back to him so that he can actually meet that in this moment and then heal. And so when you have that awareness as a coach, you can sort of step out of the role and say, I don't really feel this way, but I'm noticing in myself this urge to sort of scream at you. So I'm going to take this puppet, or I'm going to stand over here and I'm going to play out this role.
No shit.
And I'm going to start talking to you and engaging in that. So, the point is that it's like the relationship is so fluid that someone has to really track and pace and stalk themselves to have this idea of, like, what is me and what am I centered in, and what is actually now being dreamt up through me for the benefit of the client. Because if I'm not careful, I'll re-trigger and re-traumatize the client, because that anger will just go boom. And all of a sudden they're being triggered like their father.
The pattern again. It's so interesting.
And then I'm just adding on.
That happened with me with a close buddy, maybe a year ago. We were talking about crypto and stuff was moving, and I'd kind of given him feedback about how I trade and So I was kind of repeating the same stuff, and called me again a different time and was like the same thing. And I finally was kind of belittled him a little bit and was sarcastic. And I was like, fuck dude, like,
come on, man.
And so I said it differently. And he told me afterwards that it triggered him, that how this dad energy.
Right. Yeah.
And it was like,
so you may have,
fuck.
You may have been dreamt up by him.
Yeah.
In that moment.
And he said it was really good because what happened, okay, didn't happen in his real life, was we got to interact with that. And I got to share that energy that came up in me, where it came from. And I got to own that and then almost like reparent him in that moment. And so I think about, like, kind of unconsciously doing this, but what rolled out of it was him potentially having this healing experience with that authority.
Well, what if everything in our life, from our body symptoms to our relationships to our fantasies, our flirts, our dreams, the chance encounters, the bird that flies by? What if all of those things were there to awaken us to our fullest potential? What if, the people that we call disturbers or enemies or the people that trigger us, what if they're all here as allies, and our own psyche is dreaming them up, just like you got dreamt up to sort of belittle the friend in the way of his parent. What if all of life is being dreamt up to awaken us to our fullest potential and our true purpose here on earth?
Well, if that were the case, how does someone tune into that?
Well, I think just through awareness, right? I mean, you can be the one that belittles the friend and not take away anything from that, or you could look at that experience and spend time analyzing it and recognize that that actually wasn't you in that moment, and have that level of awareness. It's a deep level of sensitivity and awareness that one develops, where they start to look at everything in their life in a purposeful way.
Mm. Making the mundane beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, there's many different exercises we could do, but I mean, the idea that even like a song that pops into your head, or something in this room that's flirting with you, an inanimate object, all of that is part of the dreaming process that's calling you to your full potential, that's waking you up to these secondary parts of yourself, to the parts of yourself that need to be healed, the parts of yourself that you've marginalized, to give you access to your truest potential. And relationships are the easiest way,
Yeah. It's okay, Rumi.
Even the timing of that bark, that is not a coincidence, right?
Yeah.
The time that he barked in this conversation and what we're talking about, and just showing the we need to, if I'm looking at that metaphorically, I'm like speaking with that level of authority about this, maybe I have an edge to really barking that out to the world.
Ooh.
Right. And so it's like everything that's happening is meaningful, even a dog barking in the middle of a podcast, which for a moment can seem like a disturbance.
Sure.
My kids sometimes run into my office when I'm with my clients, and there's like this part of me that wants to be like, get out of here. Don't you know I'm doing therapy? But then there's this part of me that realizes that they're reminding me in that moment to be more playful and be more curious, and to have a child's mind with my client, or maybe my client needs it. It's all happening.
Yes.
You just have to wake up and pay attention to all of these little nuances. Most people, one of the biggest problems that people have is not believing that life is purposeful.
Yeah.
Like that everything that's happening to us is just chance coincidence. But everything has a meaning and a richness and a purposefulness to it. There are purposeful laws of nature that are moving through us and around us. And, waking up to that is not only, helps you as anything, as a human, as an optimized professional, but it makes life so much more fun and rich, because all of those things around you now become symbols. And symbols have a transcendent function where they point to something else, like multidimensionally. A stop sign stops you right there. But like the Tai Chi symbol, or some of the art you have around this room that's amazing, that leads you to somewhere else, to a different dimension. If you open up the red book behind you and you look up at one of Jung's mandalas, those are symbols that lead you to another experience. They don't stop you right there. They transcend you somewhere else. And so when you realize that, the world is a symbol, the world is being dreamt up, and we're part of this dream, and everything has multidimensionality and multiple levels of meaning and purposefulness, instead of just like this mechanical model, you start to really live.
Okay, so let's get practical. Here we are. I think for the most part, I'll speak for myself, I live in a way that feels really good. I feel like I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing, some version of it. Arguably, there's several people maybe listening right now who aren't feeling that. So what practices would you recommend for them to start to see the symbols, to see the dog barking, to see that candle that's flickering. Like, how do they start to tune into these things and see that they're happening for them?
Yeah. Well, what's coming to me is taking the longest journey you'll ever have to take, which is from your mind to your heart, right? And so when you were trading and, things were good, I'm imagining a part of your heart wasn't really feeling fulfilled like mine wasn't. There was a time when maybe it was, but it got to a point where, I was really listening to my mind. I was really focusing on, okay, I'm going to make this amount of money and then I'll have this much of safety and security, but I'm really marginalizing the feelings of my heart. And your heart is so much more powerful than your mind. Heart math, explains this beautifully. But this idea that they put people in experiments with sensors hooked up to them and they flash on the screen pictures of beautiful images or pictures of like kind of negative images, right? So that it might be like a mother holding a baby and then it'll be a picture of like a car wreck or something like that, for example. And what it shows is something like 5 or 7 seconds before the person can visually see the image, the heart will pick up on the information and the person's like heart rate or, blood pressure will rise and things like that before the image is even flipped over.
I've heard this. It's so fascinating. Every time I hear it, I'm like, what?
So like our heart and our gut, like, our gut instinct and our hearts, the feeling of joy and bliss and ecstasy and contentment that can arise in your heart. There's a quality to that when you're singing your song, when you're singing the song that that you came here in a purposeful way to sing, your unique song. When you're coming from your core courage, the root word of courage is core, means coming from your heart, being who you are, showing up and being present, being your authentic self. That's all you have to do is be what you want to do. Follow what brings you the most joy. What do you want to get out of bed and do that it's not work for you? It's a labor of love, maybe,
But so many people so many people do not feel this, right? You and I went through periods of it. I'd say actually recently I was going through another spell of it and I've course corrected and I feel more in alignment. But what do we have to offer for people who have no idea what you're talking about? And they're just like, what? Like, I don't know. I don't have time to figure out what gets me out of bed in the morning because I need to go to work to do this job that I don't love, to be in this relationship that I don't love, and so on and so forth. We know that story, but like what?
Well, one thing you can do just out of the gate is have a conversation with that part of yourself, right? Because already there's a split. You're saying, I don't like this relationship. I don't like this job, but I have to do it. Well, okay. Well, maybe talk it out. Try to learn from that side. And like, what is that real? Is that your voice? Or is that the voice of your parents? Is that the voice of society? Is that the voice of the American dream? Or, the voice of your religion? And, real freedom is tough stuff. Osho says it's the most dangerous thing because, most of society is set up to protect us from that experience. Carl Jung says the purpose of religion is to protect us from having the direct experience of God. Because having a direct experience and realizing that you're it and what you do matters, that's a lot of responsibility. So, we have to kind of move from this childish mentality of doing what everyone tells us to do to become a real adult. And that doesn't matter what age you are, right? There are 70-year-old children walking around. Most of them are.
Yes.
And the most important thing to do is to get still and to go within and realizing that the same technology and the same information you're looking for outside of yourself exists inside of yourself and it's authentic to you, right? So just taking a few minutes to be silent and to have a relationship with your soul and realizing it's a shift of a vantage point because we identify so much with our physical body. We call that in Sanskrit, it's called ahamkara. It's actually the most subtle, it's the last layer of our being. We have like our senses, the elements and our senses. Then we have this feeling, memory, willing, thinking faculties. And then this subtlest layer that we don't even know, it's just like kind of fairy dust over us, is this illusion that we are this body, right? But who's the one that's talking now through this, right? What is the one that perceives the world in this body that has been there since I was born till now, while this body is changing, while my cells are changing, every 7 days. The same body that I had now is not going to be the same body at all in 7 years or some point of time. And so it's getting this identification, changing this vantage point to identifying with yourself as the soul. This is a body that I live in. This is my chariot. This is my car, right? And, on that context, it's like this whole the idea of racism is so absurd, because if we realize that this body is just a vehicle for us, just like our car going, I don't look at your car and say, oh, that's a black car or that's a white car. I don't like that one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's all this is. Skin color is just, it's a painting of our vehicle, of the car that we're sitting in. So it's like switching to this identification of who we really are, right? And knowing that truly, taking a few minutes to get still and to talk to that part of herself, learn the signature of what that part of herself, how it communicates with us. What does that feel like when I get a yes from inside or a no from inside? And then accessing and following what brings you that sense of integrity and that sense of wholeness and joy and bliss that only can emanate from your heart when you know you're doing the things that you're meant to be doing.
That's it. Okay. I was searching for a nugget in there, and that's the thing that I would love to explore is who, like, it's like taking a few minutes to get in touch with that soul. Do you have like, who were your guides in this?
Yeah.
What were the things that really helped you? Because I know part of the thing that helped me, I think, was some of Ram Dass's work, whether it's his book Being Ram Dass, which was kind of post-mortem, but there was also a 5-hour Audible series that was so good. It was Becoming Nobody, I believe.
Yeah, it was great.
Okay, right?
Yeah.
I listened to it several times, and it just helped me land into getting in touch with my soul. So I would love just to give people, this is the juicy thing, because it's like we were saying before, it's like the we all, like, you got to take care of the I. And in this, I think if you start to develop a relationship with the soul, everything else just starts to unfold.
Yeah. And in English, we don't have the right words, because relationship with the soul is not actually correct, because it's like recognizing that what I am is that.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so
that and yoga,
it's a tricky thing, because we could say like talking to our soul, but then it's like, who's doing the talking, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but the one who taught me about that first was Paul Chek. And so Paul has he has a system actually of teaching people how to connect with his soul, their soul. And he's, incredible at it, in my opinion. And it starts very simply. It starts by just closing your eyes and tuning in with yourself and asking yourself, dear soul, please show me what a yes looks like and feels like. And then, for me, I notice this rising of energy that surges up through my body and kind of comes up into like my face and my nose. But for everybody has their own unique signature. So the first thing is just saying, dear soul, what does my yes look like? Just feeling the energy in your body.
For me, mine starts kind of in my gut, comes up through the heart, through the chest, and then I feel this like pulsing in my ears.
Beautiful. Okay. And now you say...
Is mine better than yours?
There's no such thing.
See?
You say... Just the fact that you can do it is already amazing. Like that's
I'm a wizard,
the thing.
as everybody tells me.
Then say, dear soul, show me what my no looks like. And notice what you feel and what happens.
I feel this like tension in my like kind of chest from like shoulder to shoulder. It's just like, this constriction.
Well, there you go, right? So now that you know how to do it, how to talk to that part of yourself and identifying with that as you start small. You say, dear soul, would you like chicken or beef? Right? Something that's like not, that you're not hugely invested to. It's like, you don't start off with, should I leave this relationship? You know what I mean?
I picked
It's
beef,
like,
by the way.
yeah. Should I have asparagus or broccoli? Right. So you start with these little small things that don't mean much, and you start practicing with that. And you realize that the same technology that works in this sort of binary yes-no system can work to talk to any living species. So you can begin to talk to the souls of your children. You can go and put your hand on a plant and talk to the plant and say, dear plant, do you need more water right now? Yes or no? And through the same signature, like through Google Translate, right? The plant's speaking in like plant language, but you can throw it into Google Translate and it'll come out in your body through your signature with your yes and your no.
I love this.
So you start practicing these kinds of things, and it takes a while to really learn that signature, because what's really interesting about it is that the ego can do a very good job at impersonating the soul.
Oh.
Because the ego will do whatever it can to protect itself. The ego is your primary identity. So, if you're really invested in eating a lot of cookies and you say, dear soul, can we have some more Oreos, right? I keep getting yeses, but like your soul's never going to tell you to do something that is against your overall well-being. Right? And so it's really centering yourself, taking time to clear yourself and wait till you feel centered. If you can imagine stepping into a pond and then seeing all of the ripples go, and then imagining waiting till all of those ripples go away and the pond is completely still again. And then asking the question, and let the question bubble up from that place without a level of detachment to the outcome. And when you can do that, which is a hard practice, but something that's obviously very easy to do, you just did it. You can develop this soul connection where then through anything in your life, should we take this airplane or this airplane? Should we interview this guest or that guest? Should we eat this or should we fast? And you can start to develop this relationship with your soul. And then when you're coming from that place, then you're living your with your full potential.
Perfect. I'm glad that felt like a really nice soft landing, and something that's very, very actionable for people listening, and myself included. Like, I just feel really good about that. I definitely, I want to go into one more area before we wrap, and it's biogeometry, and I'm fascinated by it.
Perfect.
I had a great conversation with Ryan, who actually just showed up right now. I'd love to just like unpack that a little bit for people listening who are new to it, and like what pulled you in. Again,
so biogeometry is something I'm very excited about as well, and it's something that requires a bit of like kind of humbleness as well for me to talk about, because it's such a extensive, incredible science with so many different layers. Dr. Ibrahim Karim, the founder of biogeometry, has been studying this his whole life, right? So, I'm coming at it from the position of an advanced student, but at the same time, there's so much more to learn that I haven't learned. But the idea being that Dr. Karim went around and studied all of the different sacred power spots on Earth. Okay, so he went to the temples of Giza, he went to Stonehenge, and all of these various sacred sites. There were sites that when people went and have done digs, archaeological digs, they have found that, mosques have been built on top of churches that have been built on top of temples, and each time you go down and you dig, you find another sort of sacred building that was built on top of itself, on top of something else throughout history. So, he started to ask himself, like, what is it about the land? What is it about these sacred sites that people have been going to them for years and years and years, hundreds of years, and even building them in the same spot? What was it about the energy of these spots that led these people there? And he started to realize that there was a similar energy quality, a quality of light that is a little bit specific to get into, but he calls it BG3. So he found that in all of these sacred sites all around the world, he was able to measure through pendulums that they all had this quality called BG3, which is now it's a sacred quality of energy. And it's a kind of energy that no matter who goes there, it balances you out. So if you go in there and you have like high blood pressure, it'll take you to your normal. If you go in there with low blood pressure, it'll bring you up. And it's not dose dependent. So it's like you can never get enough of being in one of these natural power spots of the earth.
Wow.
And so it's really what he found is the way that certain underground grid lines cross, some of them can be detrimental to our health and some of them can be super positive for health. And so all of these sacred sites around the world had these specific crossings of grid lines that were generating these power spots. And, you know, ancient cultures have been talking about this in all over the world, right? So you had this ancient Aboriginal concept of dream time, where they had these dream lines or these song lines where they can go and they could be in a particular spot that they knew where the earth grid lines were and how they carried, and give messages telepathically to people like, okay, I'm going to be in this particular spot at this particular time, and send these messages through the song lines, and they'd be received sometimes like, I don't even know, 50 miles away. And the person would meet them there at the exact right time and place. And so people have been understanding how these things have been working for thousands of years. In fact, we look at ourselves as quite civilized society, but we still don't know how they built the pyramids.
Yeah.
Right. And things like that.
Are these kind of crossing of the grid lines, would another word be vortexes? Is this what we're seeing in like Sedona and Zion, or is it those completely different maybe?
You know, I'm not an expert on that to say enough about the vortexes, but basically they create patterns of beneficial and non-beneficial energy. And so, you know, you might go out in nature and you'd be walking in a forest and all of a sudden you see a tree that's like kind of twisted and bent. It's a good possibility that that tree might be sitting on one of those, you know, detrimental grid lines. Right?
And so remind me again, is this where the pendulum comes in, or?
Well, the pendulum's a tool to measure this, to interact with this energy. So it gives us the opportunity to act and measure anything in this room from any one of these beings. You know, does it have that quality? Two things. One, does it have that quality of BG3, which is the quality of energy found in a sacred power spot? Or if not, does it resonate with us? Is it increasing my personal energy or decreasing my personal energy? So you can, you know, I could measure my own personal energy, and then I could measure the piece of chicken or measure the piece of beef and see which one actually is going clockwise versus counterclockwise and raising my energy or lowering my energy. And that might be completely different to you. But what's happening in these sacred power spots is he found that all of these sacred power spots give out this quality of beneficial energy that's good for everybody. So, you know, you might have a set of tuning forks, and, you know, 693 might be good for you, but 396 might be the one that I need, right? But this is creating these kinds of energies are not only good for one type of person. These are places that whoever walks in there is getting a healing response, right? So that quality of energy is then brought into the home, let's just say. And so the idea is that, you know, Wi-Fi, for example, is something like goes out at 50 hertz. You know, 5G has a very, very specific frequency, and the shape of that frequency and the narrowness of that frequency is detrimental to the human being. Because think about it, like, you know, when you're talking about, you know, your son wanting to only eat certain kind, like, you know, strict on kale, for example, and having kale and chicken. Well, that's just one profile of potentially like 100 different proteins he could eat and hundreds of different vegetables and fruits that all have this variety and this diversity, right, of nutrients and macronutrients and all sorts of things, vitamins, right? So the idea is when you take biogeometry into the home by using shape, right? So they have these different stickers and things that really alter. So it's a little bit difficult to explain because there's this concept of physics of quality, where that, like, our taste, the colors that we see, shapes of things, all of these are interacting. So, you know, we see the color red, but that's corresponding to like a chakra, that's corresponding to a particular angle in nature. And, you know, there's a whole science behind this. But the idea really is taking the things that we have, like this microphone or your Wi-Fi router, and adjusting it in a way through color like a color sticker in the right spot, or through shape, or through rotating it so it's in the right relationship with its surroundings, and various other techniques to create that BG3 in that product. And so now our cell phone that's putting out this signal, that's quite a powerful signal, or a Wi-Fi unit that's putting out this powerful signal, we're then applying this harmonious healing energy to it. So it's carrying the frequency of what it's doing. You can still pick up the Wi-Fi, but now there's this breadth, there's this diversity of this harmonized frequency that it's going out with. And so you start basically applying this to different devices and throughout your life to consistently increase that level of BG3, or that kind of sacred, harmonious temple quality energy that resonates naturally from the earth, that is here from the earth to heal us and to keep us vital. And you bring that into your home and you apply that to your technology.
Wow. So I know you're building a house with this like biogeometric principles.
Totally. Yeah. I'd love to talk about that too.
So that's on one end of the spectrum, we'll say. And the other end is people listening like, that sounds pretty cool. Like, what's the 101 look like? How can I get started with this in a simple way, low barrier, boom?
Well, I mean, honestly, if you're just interested in products, let's just say, as one of the ways, you can get a biogeometry pendant, which looks like this. And this is
seen a lot of those around lately.
Yeah, this is a shape that carries this shape because of the way that it's shaped with the circle, and then this thing here, the slit, this emits BG3. So this pendant is emitting that quality. So when I'm wearing it, it's affecting my entire field. It also has, very interestingly, these what they call biosignatures, which is the shape of how energy flows through our organ systems. So this pendant is carrying probably like 50 or 75 different shapes of how harmonized energy would move through your kidney or your liver, your heart, etc. So you're getting BG3 and you're harmonizing your organs. And this is just like $150 thing.
Where am I getting that?
That's just Biogeometry's website.
Okay. So is what's the name of the website? Biogeometry?
I think biogeometry.com.
We'll figure it out. We'll have it in the show notes for sure.
And so that's one way. And then they also have a product called the Home Kit, which has this cube, which I actually have in my bag. We could pull it out. But
pull that out. I'm curious. Yeah. Remember Ryan was talking about the cube the other day. I feel like I need a cube or a couple cubes.
Well, one will probably be enough. But yeah, so there's
this. Sure?
Well, one of these goes about 5,000 square feet. So more or less to cover your house. Yeah.
Perfect.
So so this is a cube. And again, this is emitting BG3 into your space. And so
thank you for bringing that.
This comes in the Home Kit. And they also have various other attachments, like one you can put on your water line, one you could put on your Wi-Fi router, one you can put on electrical panel, things like that.
So these are pretty simple to do. You get the Home Kit.
Right. So just to give you a little bit of background on this, how I got into this was I was living in New York City. Okay. I owned a penthouse on Bond Street on the 7th floor.
What's up, playa?
Right. And we moved into this place and we started having symptoms like not being able to sleep very well, and other things were happening. And Paul Chek told me, he's like, you might want to look into EMFs and Wi-Fi's and are there any cell phone towers or anything like that around your place? So I look out my window, and this is like the first time I'm even looking for something like this. And I see on like every building around me, huge like Verizon towers pointing like right at my window. Right. So we hire a building biologist who comes in from Bo Biology, a German healthy home kind of business. And he comes in, this gentleman, and says, you have 100,000 like megahertz or whatever, however they measure it in your room. And like, you need like one for your cell phone to work. Right. So like these things are so powerful. The signals they're putting out, like well beyond what anyone needs to get. We're so focused on like, we must have good reception and download speed at all costs, right? Mm-hmm. There's these like super powerful devices. And so I'll get to the solution about that in a second. But so we basically, what we had to do is we had just built this whole place. We'd renovated the whole place. And now I'm freaked out that like my kids are living here. I can't sleep. There's so much infiltration of all of this negative energy. I started looking, I turn on my Wi-Fi and there's like 25 different Wi-Fis that pick up in the building. And I'm like, now I'm like getting turned on to this stuff. So I was taking it from a state of fear. right? So we move out, we have to renovate again. And now we're putting up like shielding paint on the wall that we're then putting decorative covering over and shielding films on the windows. We're putting like stuff under our rugs and our carpets to shield the Wi-Fi from downstairs, and basically making a very expensive Faraday cage in our
Holy
apartment.
shit. How much did that cost?
It costs a lot because
Yes.
I want to say this, so I don't want to turn people. It's not
fair.
actually necessary. I don't want to turn people off to this idea of shielding, because
I appreciate that.
if you build it into your construction, let's say you're building a house, or if you have if you just have like white walls and you want to paint over them with shielding paint and then put paint over it, it's not that expensive.
Gotcha.
But when you want to do it in a way that's like kind of decorative in the style of this like penthouse, and taking down a decorative decoration, with different materials and different things that you have going on, then it was quite expensive.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it was cost a fortune, small fortune. And so we did this whole thing. Then I get turned on to this idea of biogeometry, and it's like with a $19 sticker, you can harmonize your Wi-Fi and produce BG3 into your whole house.
Even with 100,000 megahertz.
The idea is that it's not like being afraid of technology. It's not blocking technology. It's harmonizing technology.
Gotcha.
It's so much more like with the Tao of things.
Fuck,
right?
does that make sense?
So I went to a town meeting with a bunch of anthroposophists up in my area.
Hey, can you explain what an anthroposophist is?
I guess anthroposophists, my brother would know a little more, but essentially students of Rudolf Steiner, would you say? Yeah. And so there's a group of these like underground anthroposophists. One of them was Dr. Tom Cowan, actually.
Oh, he's been on the podcast.
Yeah. He was there at this group.
Fucking love him.
And these are just cool people that are meeting and discussing, just wellness and how to support the community. And, they were sort of like up in arms about the idea of like, 5G towers coming in and stuff like that. And I said to them, look, we could be the town that protests the tower. We could be the town that goes and we could burn the tower down, but like these things are coming no matter what. Why don't we be the first town that goes out and reaches out to Verizon and says, look, we want you to put this in our town, but you have to harmonize it with biogeometry.
How was this received by like a Dr. Thomas Cowan?
Well, I think he was pretty open-minded.
Was he into biogeometry at all? Or?
He was. He had talked about it on YouTube. So I don't know to the extent that he has it incorporated into his life, but he's very knowledgeable about it.
Yeah.
And so I was just talking about my experience, again, from a place of real humbleness, because by no means am I an expert in this. This is like a lifetime science to go all the way. But I was just speaking about it from my experience, and I was just kind of showing them, I was using it as a metaphor. We didn't have an active tower that's coming in, but this idea of like, instead of going against it, how to go with it, how to use technology to also, for our benefit, for all of the, benefits, like, hey, we're broadcasting this now to thousands of people, right? Versus doing it also in a way that is creating health and circulating wellness and wholeness, right? And this is really what like businesses need to get back to. This is what, all of these producers of these cell phones and towers and all this technology, how to create it in a way that's in reciprocity with the laws of nature, so that we can use this technology to support ourselves, not only in making our lives easier, but making ourselves healthier. And so biogeometry really is able to just work with what you have in your home, the way you have it, and harmonizing it so that you begin to resonate. It's not like you block out those other frequencies, but you begin to raise the level of that harmony in your house and in yourself so high that you're just in resonance now with that higher frequency, with that more, full spectrum, we'll say, frequency, versus this like narrow band that's causing you repetitive, immunity attack, like eating chicken, for the rest of your life every single day. Like a lot of people do.
Sure.
Only have about 7 to 10 foods. They know about 7 to 10 exercises, right? They probably, have even more narrow bands around many other parts of their life, but really opening up to the full diversity of life, the full diversity of light and of sound and of this full spectrum living. And that's really what biogeometry is doing. It's working with the laws of nature, the way that nature naturally creates harmony, and then applying that into the space, knowing that we are our environment, and how to do that in an elegant way.
Well, I'm curious, we're getting ready to build a place, and, short of what you've done with, the intention of your home and land being, in coherence with biogeometry, like what are some things, like if the architecture's already done, like what are some simple things?
Totally.
Is it simply just getting the home kit, or there's some other things you can do?
This is one of those things where you can layer it to the infinite degree, right? But I'll just tell you a little bit about what we're doing. First of all, when you're looking for land, look at the place where the home site is going to be. Is that a power spot? Is that a place that naturally has that energy, or is it a place that has a lot of detrimental energy? And putting that into your decision-making process. Now, the thing about biogeometry is that unlike feng shui that comes into your house and says, you could never live there, or you have to have 8 things on this wall and 4 things on this wall. I'm like, why? Well, because we say so. There's no measurement. There's no pendulum showing you, look, your energy is increasing, right? Or it has this quality, but there's these rules around that. Biogeometry works with whatever you have, right? So if you have a house that's already built out, they're not going to come in and tell you to move anything around. It's like, how do we work with what we have to harmonize it? But in the context of trying to do everything with the utmost intention from the beginning, first you look at the land that you're buying and the land itself, and particularly the home spot. What is the quality of energy? Then when you're designing the house, you design it with biogeometry principles so that the design itself has this sort of the right flow of energy and the right quality of energy in the design. And you could work with through many different ways, like the way things interface with each other, through the shape of the house, through the relationship from the ceiling height to the width of the room, all of these different ways. There's so many creative ways through the color scheme to create this kind of quality of energy. For us, when we pick our well, I was on FaceTime in Egypt. I was here, but in upstate New York where I'm building this house, but I was FaceTiming with Dr. Kareem in Egypt, and he's measuring and saying, put your well right there. And so our well has biogeometry. So when we're tapping down, we're tapping into water that's coming from an underground reservoir that has the quality of that temple water, right? When we're putting in the water line to the house, we have particular shapes on it. So as the water's moving into the house, it's being harmonized. When we put the electrical lines in from the street, I was out there putting attachments on them, sending pictures to Dr. Kareem and his daughter, Dureya, who were measuring as well and saying, yeah, this is now your electricity is harmonized. Now your data line is harmonized. Now your cable is harmonized. In terms of building the house itself, of course, there's all the information about building it with non-VOC and healthy materials. And there's a lot of information on that you could find. But also they have this process of collecting a sample of every building. So we're collecting a 1-inch sample of every building material, from the cement all the way up to the paint, everything that's being used in our house, we're collecting. And then at the end, what you can do is they have this wheel. If you imagine like a wheel with all these little circles that go into an interior circle, all with these little holes in them. And you take each building material one at a time and you put a sample of it in its particular spot in this wheel based on where that gets BG3, and then where the next one is and relationship to those two, and then the third one in relationship to the first two and that one. And you build this matrix of every material in your house. So every material is held in relationship to each one and brings harmony. And then you have that in your house, and that brings BG3 now to all of your building materials. Okay. The way the house is oriented on the space, because you know the direction of these grid lines. So putting your house in an orientation with the BG3 lines, so that now you're on that flow, putting your garden in that, the way that the relationship of the different parts on your property are to each other, the shape of the driveway, so it has the right flow, the shape of the pool, the shape of the trails on your property. All of these things can be added so that there's just this level of intent and mindfulness. And each one of those increases the level of BG3. And then when you're done with all of that, then you can do all the things that people can do now still in their home, right? You measure and you see what still needs to be tweaked.
oh, there's a few objects in my house that are holding out. Okay, so how do I address those specifically, or how do I rotate those so that they're in the right position with the rest of the environment to bring literally every single thing in your house up to that level of sacred energy?
Is this something that you've just studied and you know how to do this, or you've got, Dr. Kareem? Are there other people in your area? Like, who is helping you sort out what ain't working?
Well, so what I would recommend to anybody is taking the foundational training with biogeometry. It's like a 3-week course. You meet every couple days. There's like very kind of simple homework assignments, but it's an incredible education to do this yourself. My wife, Kara, she originally got introduced to this, and she took the foundational course, and she came home, and I just saw her doing all these amazing things. And then, so, we had already hired, the way it started was we had hired a practitioner to come to our house and do this all. And when the practitioner came, this is to the house I'm living in now that I'm renting for the last 3 years. When we moved into this house, we had this horrible smell of sulfur water, right? I don't know if you ever smelled like hard water.
Yeah.
It smells like shit.
Yes. Yeah, literally.
And so we put in this whole filtration system. We could not get this out. These biogeometry practitioners came into our house, put little stickers and corrected grid lines. By the end of the first day, the smell was gone.
What?
And it never came back.
What?
Yeah. And, I've had a lot of really trippy experiences that I could go on and that just prove to me that this is a really powerful thing that's happening. Even in relationships in my family. But once we saw that power, she went and took the class, and then she came home, and I saw how empowered she was. It's like the same way that I talked about Sanskrit having a language for spirituality, right? What we call spirituality, having a language for that now. Now, biogeometry gave us a language to interact with nature,
Ooh.
Right? So now everything in nature becomes alive because I can talk to it through my pendulum and see, does it have VG3? How is it responding to my energy? Is this plant making me stronger or weaker, etc.? And so it opened us up to this whole, like, oh my God, like the whole environment is interacting with us, and we're in constant communication, but we don't know how to talk. And now I had this skill set. So I went and took the foundation class, then we took the advanced class together. The next level of class would be becoming a certified practitioner, which they haven't been able to do for a while because of restrictions with traveling. They're from Egypt and they haven't been able to get to the United States, but that would be the next level for me. But, whether or not you want to be a certified biogeometry practitioner and be able to go to people's homes and correct grid lines and do all that, taking the foundational training should be, again, like a 101 thing we learn. When we're learning about the soul, we should learn about how to interact with our environment. So I think it's foundational training for anybody, and I highly recommend it. The other way would be to get a biogeometry practitioner from your area to come to your house and tune it up and to teach you. And, I'd recommend doing both depending on someone's level of funding. Yeah,
that sounds, fascinating. And I'm really feeling as my schedule opens up now, like that feels real purposeful.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I love the idea of really diving into that and seeing kind of where it goes. Gosh.
Yeah. And you should get them on your podcast. At least get Dereya, Dr. Kareem's daughter. She's amazing.
Done.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm excited to explore this. I know I talked about it with Ryan when he was on the podcast, but
yeah, Ryan came to my house and felt the energy and felt what was happening in my space. And then he went and took the foundational training.
Yeah. So tell me this, how do you stay like not over obsessive with it? Like, oh, that's not quite right. I can imagine even with like EMFs. I remember listening to Luke, a good friend now, but Luke's story on a podcast with Bruce Lipton. Luke was like super like cognizant of the EMFs and where he was. And it was almost like it was making it worse because he like knew too much and he wasn't harmonizing with it, certainly, but like, how do you stay in a good relationship with it?
I think it takes a paradigm shift, because for me, I was living in such fear of EMFs. Okay. Which is a healthy fear. If you don't take some precautions, right? I mean, you can't just say, I'm just not going to worry about all these Wi-Fi units and these cell phone towers and stuff and all the computers I'm on and, the electric car I'm driving, it's sitting on top of a battery and this and that. you can't just ignore it. But my original idea was sort of being in fear of it. So I'd have switches in my house. I would turn the Wi-Fi off and turn it on, right? And I would like cut the electricity off at night, and I would be like, screaming at my family, like, you left the Wi-Fi on. Oh my God. Like, that's like the worst thing you could do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then switching to this idea that it's not about being afraid of it. It's about harmonizing with it. And, I practice muscle testing a lot just to see the response of something on my body. And one of the things that tripped me out the most is, I was having my wife muscle test me, and I was finding that, of course, you're going to go weaker with a non-harmonized Wi-Fi unit on versus off. Your body is not going to lie to you. So, when you for muscle testing, if you take your arm and just say, show me the yes, just like the soul, or show me my no, you'll find that when your body's giving you a no response or a response that's not in truth, you'll go weaker, because our DNA was built in a way that we are stronger when we're in truth. Because if we were lying to our tribe, like let's say we stole some food from our tribe, right? That could put the whole tribe at risk. So the same way that like a lie detector test might work or something like that, our body gives off a response to if we're in congruence with what we're saying. So just if you say, my name is Cal or my name's Jared, for example, your body will be stronger or weaker based on that. And everyone can test this, through various different ways. You can use your finger like this, or your arm, or even your leg, right? So we were, and again, you can test this in biogeometry, but just through pure muscle testing, I found that actually the Wi-Fi on with the biogeometry on it made me stronger than the Wi-Fi off, which was just like crazy for me to think about. But I started to realize that it's not about blocking. It's not about being in fear. It's just about harmonizing your space and then resonating with that energy, learning what is the feeling quality of BG3. How does that feel inside of myself? Wearing the appropriate protection, harmonizing your space, and then just like letting go. Like I go on an airplane. To fly here. I have my cube on my tray table. I'm wearing my pendant and I have my cube. And I don't worry about it. And I realize that I'm also giving love to everybody on that plane because I'm harmonizing the whole space and I'm improving their lives and the pilots and the stewardesses, right? And all the impacts that they're having on their families and all the people they're going to be meeting throughout the day. And so you start just resonating this quality of energy. And that really elevates you well over the obsession of the fears of all that. I mean, I wouldn't want to be on that plane without my biogeometry. But when I have that on me, with me, I feel totally safe and I feel great because I'm actually I'm bringing life to life. That's like real art and love,
Wow. I feel like that's a great place to just land it. I'm already looking forward to the next time we get on here,
Me
man.
Too.
Yes, damn, we're just scratching the surface. How
never enough.
How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah. So I'm developing a website that'll be out called jasonpickard.org. And that's the best way to contact me. I'll also leave my email with you so that people can just email me directly.
Yep.
And check me out and see what I'm up to.
And what can people expect to work with you? What does that look like?
Yeah. So, it's life process coaching would be, going through your whole life process from, your childhood myths and your dreams, where you're at in your relationships, what you want to accomplish, looking at the dreaming nature of your life and dreams at night and your fantasies and hopes for yourself, going through all of the different aspects of the check system, from, Dr. Quiet, Dr. Movement, Dr. Diet, Dr. Happiness, looking at all of that and how to be an optimized individual, things like meditation and Tai Chi and inner work, do a lot of work with art and music and shamanism, different types of shamanic practices, and just really about me helping you find your wholeness and your fullest potential.
I can't think of anyone better to do it, brother. I love this.
Thanks, man.
From trader to, I don't even want to put a label on it, just being.
Probably human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming here, brother.
Thank you.
Yes.